Where is the lightning to lick you with its tongue? Where is the madness with which you should be cleansed? Zarathustra has found no greater power on earth than good and evil. But much that seemed good to one people seemed shame and disgrace to another. A table of values hangs over every people. But can you furnish yourself with your own good and evil, above yourself as a law? You had not yet sought yourselves when you found me. One repays a teacher badly if one remains only a pupil. Now I bid you lose me and find yourselves.
We're here with Matthew Stover, author of several Star Wars novels. Hello, sir.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
I imagine you were a Star Wars fan before you started writing your Star Wars novels. Tell me a little bit about your Star Wars experience before you started writing for this.
I was a lifelong fan, well, from the age of 15. I literally saw A New Hope 20 times in the theater. It blew my shit away. Probably saw Empire 25 or more. I will tell you, I saw that movie opening night in whatever it was, 1980, when it came out in Champaign-Urbana, packed house. People cheered when the heroes showed up and booed and hissed the villains. But I will tell you that when Luke came streaking up out of the carbonite pit, the entire theater just went apeshit, just went up for grabs. People jumped out of their seats shouting. It was awesome.
Did it inspire you to write, or were you already a science fiction fan? Or
well, I was always interested in writing. I mean, my mom was a professor of speech communication and rhetoric, and so there were a lot of books in our house. I already wanted to be a writer. I didn't have much success with it for decades, and I kind of gave it up. I got interested in the theater, went to school to study acting and directing, and worked as a professional actor for a while in Chicago after college. But all the time I was trying to write my first science fiction novel, which is now in print as the first of the Acts of Cain, Heroes Die.
How did you get involved writing for Star Wars novels?
Chronologically, the first one I wrote was Traitor for the new Jedi Order. It was basically something that Del Rey wanted to get me involved in. They were trying to collect all of their young up-and-coming fantasy writers like me and Greg Keyes, and trying to recruit us in for this massive 19-book saga of the new Jedi Order. And I originally was not going to do it. I had no idea what it was they were planning to do, and I wasn't really interested in writing the kind of Star Wars fiction that I had been, seeing some of back in the 90s. What seemed to be every other book was about some reincarnated clone of the Emperor kidnapping the Solo twins. And I just, wasn't interested. But I remember Jenny Smith, who was at the time Shelley's assistant, coming to me to ask me if I would be interested in writing for Star Wars and telling me about the alien race of religious fanatics who are invisible in the Force. And, I thought that would be, I found it interesting.
I said, all right, I'll think about it. And while I was thinking about it, I ended up at Gen Con. And I was there with Bob Salvatore, who wrote Vector Prime, and Mike Stackpole, who wrote Onslaught, the first two books of the NJO, which mine was 13. And these are both guys that I had known for a little bit and admired. I like their work and I like them as people. And we got to talking about it. One of them had heard a rumor that I had been offered a slot in the NJO because they were both already on board. And I said, yeah, I'm just not sure I'm going to do it because it's not my story. And it was Mike, I think, who said, listen, I don't know what the first print run of your last book was, but the first print run of your next book could be 250,000 copies. And I said, oh, I get it.
Bob Salvatore and Mike Stackpole metaphorically took me by the throat and shook me and said, "What are you, nuts?
What do you mean you don't want to write Star
how many
Wars?
people read those books?"
Yeah.
And yeah, they just said, this is an opportunity. It's not going to come around again. You better jump on it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how it happened.
Your first Star Wars book was set in a different era entirely. New Jedi Order Traitor is during the Yuuzhan Vong War, following Jacen Solo right after the attack on Coruscant. Were you already reading the books, or did you have to catch up on everything?
At the time, I had read the first two of Alan Dean Foster's Star Wars books, the novelization and Splinter of the Mind's Eye. Mm-hmm. And I had read Brian Daley's Han Solo books. And I'm thinking one or two of the Lando books as well. I didn't pick up Heir to the Empire and stuff until I actually signed the contract to start working for Star Wars.
When I was originally hired to do that book, I was told that they wanted me to take this Jim Luceno character, Voyage, and make her like the Yoda of the new Jedi Order. And what they wanted her to do is teach Jacen how to withdraw from the Force so that he would be completely undetectable, even by other Force sensors, right? So he could sneak in and do secret agent stuff. And in Onslaught, Mike the second book, the NJO, Traitors 13, he just casually references that ability as just something that all of the current crop of Jedi already know how to do. When I went to the story conference, I mentioned that to the editors, and they looked at each other and they're like, "Oh, right, that was what we wanted you to do." We didn't even notice. So I left that first evening at the story conference in a panic. But the next morning, I got this idea of having Voyage not be, never really knowing what her game really is, right? Because Jacen doesn't know. So I decided I wasn't gonna let the readers know either. And the way I pitched that story was, what if Jacen is already a captain, is being tortured, and she comes in as his rescuer, but what she says to him is not, I'm Luke Skywalker, I'm going to rescue you. What she says to him is, everything I tell you is a lie. Every question I ask is a trick. You will find no truth in me. And so that let me have Jacen's focus be on, what is she trying to do to me, right? Not just surviving it, but trying to understand why she's doing it. And I also knew that I was going to get to have a Force using, say, there's no such thing as the dark side. I knew I was going to get to do that. And I knew I was going to get to do the only dark side you need to worry about, Jacen Solo, is the one inside you. And I knew it was going to be a shitstorm. And I was so excited. One of my best friends at the time was an even bigger Star Wars geek than me. And when I got back from the story conference, I went over to his house. It was like 10 o'clock at night. And I was like, John. I'm going to fuck with these people like they've never before. Voyage, the character, Jim Luceno's character for the new Jedi Order, is there specifically to be an old Republic Jedi who can talk to Luke about the way they used to do things.
Yes.
And she was always, there was always an ambiguity about her, or good guy or bad guy. But the whole ambiguity in Traitor, that was actually the way that hit on me, that struck me as what would make it the most interesting book to write. That's all it was.
Overnight, I got this idea of relating Voyage to a Taoist sage. And I got the line that came to me, everything I tell you is a lie. Every question I ask is a trick. You will find no truth in me. And that's what I went and I pitched to them, of making her kind of like the anti-Yoda.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, write it. And here I am.
So we've talked a bit about Jedi philosophy and culture. Is there any particular inspiration that you had while writing it? I know Lucas based a lot of things off of Buddhism. Did you follow that, or was there
Well,
anything else?
I was thinking more in terms of classical Taoism, which is philosophically related to Buddhism, but it's not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let me put it this way. The first quatrain of the Tao Te Ching is usually translated, "The way that can be weighed is not the eternal way." But it can also be translated, "The force that can be forced is not the eternal force." And that just kind of sparked something in me.
Yeah.
And I was not really that familiar with it when I started working on Traitor, but the character of Vergere, she's very, very much in the vein of a Taoist sage. Taoist sage for a brutal, violent situation.
Yeah, a Taoist sage who's kind of gone a little off the wall. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they were, as I understand it, I'm not an expert on this.
Mm-hmm.
As I understand it, they were very fond of puns and puns, jokes, tricks, ways to basically get your analytical mind out of the way so that you could understand truths that are not accessible by rationality.
Both your Star Wars novels are very philosophically oriented on the nature of the Force. Can you give us an insight into your thinking as you were writing some of this excellent philosophy?
Well, I don't really think of it so much as philosophy.
Okay.
It has to do more with the way I see the world.
Okay.
The Force was originally created as a sort of science fictional metaphor for the Eastern concept of the Tao.
Mm-hmm.
And my approach to using the Force has always been to try and make it more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, you'll notice as you go through my books that I never say what the Force isn't, because strictly speaking, there is virtually nothing that the Force isn't.
Yeah, the Force is one.
This book has a lot of philosophy on the light side and dark side of the Force. I was curious how you, as a Star Wars fan and author, view the light side and dark side of the Force.
Well, I will tell you exactly how I view it. Are you familiar with the Buddhist parable of the blind men and the elephant?
No, I am not.
Okay. This is a teaching of, if memory serves, of Siddhartha, of the Buddha. And he tells the story. His disciples ask him, what is the way of enlightenment? And the way he answers is he tells them the story of 5 blind men encountering an elephant. One of the blind men grabs the elephant by the tail, and he says, an elephant is like a rope. And another man grabs the elephant by a leg and says, an elephant is like a tree. And another one runs his hands along the elephant's belly and says, an elephant is like a rock. And another one grabs its ear and says, an elephant is like a leaf. And the 5th blind man grabs him by the trunk and says, no, an elephant is like a snake. They are all completely right insofar as their perceptions allow them to be. But in their inability to comprehend things that are beyond their perceptions, they're also completely wrong. That's what I really think about the Force and the light side, dark side, the whole thing. All explanations are incomplete. Nobody understands everything. Everyone sees a different piece and works with it in ways that they are comfortable with. And that's what I think. I did martial arts for many years. I'm reasonably familiar with a number of of what we would call Eastern mystic philosophies. And there are a lot of ways in which the Force, in Mr. Lucas's formulation, echoes the Tao, the way in the Tao Te Ching. In fact, the very first couplet, the first phrase of the Tao Te Ching, the Book of Changes, is usually translated as the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, but it can also be translated as the force that can be forced is not the real force. And there's a lot of parallels there, and one of the things that Lao Tzu, that particular Chinese philosopher, talks about is the limitations of human understanding. There are things that are too big for us to see all sides of at once. We end up like the blind men with the elephant, and what we would call wisdom, I think, would be the ability to, as one of those blind men, to let go of the trunk and grab onto the ear, and then maybe touch the leg and grab the tail, so that at least you would get a better idea of how things look. But you'll never know it all. And that's where I am, right there. There are certain things that you just have to accept will always be mysterious, and you let it go.
The point is that what we speak of in speaking of the Force, what Jedi speak of, is those parts of the Force that they can perceive.
Mm-hmm.
And just because they don't perceive other things in the Force doesn't mean they're not there.
Okay. It seems like you have a firmer grasp on some of the philosophy issues behind the Force than maybe other parties. Are you trained as a philosopher, or have you just devoted some really thoughtful times to the problem?
I did read, I should say,
Okay.
a tremendous amount of philosophy when I was in my 20s and early 30s. My own novels have something of a philosophical edge to them.
Yeah.
It's not just about the action. They're about ideas as well. And I think it was that blend that said to them, hey, that's what Star Wars is. Because Star Wars has always been an action franchise that is also about the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the philosophy. It's about the Force. Most of my understanding of philosophy of the Tao of the Force comes from my own experience.
Okay.
This is part of developing this sort of relationship with these larger forces that govern our lives is part of martial arts training. My hobby is martial arts. I'm a student and instructor of a type of martial arts called the Dagobert Blend.
Oh. Yeah, did you know that Walter John Williams was also a big martial art?
Oh, absolutely. The last time I spoke with Walter, I believe he said something that he's like about a 4th degree black belt in Kempo.
Yeah. How that new concept of the Force, this new perception, let's say, how were they welcomed by Del Rey?
They liked it. For what I have heard from Del Rey and from the folks out at Skywalker Ranch, is that they really, really like my book and they like the direction that I've taken things. Again, I don't think that there's anything really that new. My depiction of the Force goes right back to Yoda's teaching in The Empire Strikes Back. It grows straight out of there, and I think that they don't have a problem with it because I'm not contradicting.
Yeah, it's the same thing, but
canon. I'm making it larger instead of smaller.
It's a new point of view.
Exactly, as Obi-Wan would say, from a certain point of view.
Yeah.
I don't like to comment on the specifically on the text of the work itself, because what anything in the book actually means is what it means to each individual reader.
Okay.
What I mean, I don't like restricting people's experiences of the novel by saying, well, this is what this is about, and that's what that is about, and if you think that it's about something else, you're wrong, because that's just not true. It's about what you think it's about.
Yeah.
If somebody else disagrees with you, the odds are you're both right.
Okay. That's great. But that's making us think about those philosophies. That's great.
I love the relationship elements of Star Wars. And so one of my favorite moments in Traitor is when Jacen is at their old apartment and he's walking through the dining room and stuff.
Oh, I love that too.
Do you have strong feelings or like an answer to whether that was Anakin or not? The vision of him or not?
Do I have strong feelings? Yes. Am I going to tell you what they are?
No.
But I will explain to you the reason for this. This is actually a conscious policy that I inculcated because I used to spend a lot of time on the Force.net, especially during the MJO, just talking with the fans and stuff, just kind of seeing what they thought. And a lot of people would ask me about Traitor because it was very controversial in fandom. And they would ask me things, and I said, and I would say, they would ask me, does this mean this? And I'm like, I am not going to tell you what I meant by that, because it's not my story. It's actually your story, right? The only story that you encounter is the one that happens inside your head when you read these little black marks on the page, right? My opinion about what something means in here does not count for more than yours. It doesn't. I literally believe this. This is an article of faith for me, that what a story means, anything in a story, is what it means to you personally when you're reading, right? So I figured if I tell people what I thought I was trying to say, they might mistake that for the truth, right? But it's not. It is what I was trying to say, but because of my privileged position with my name on the cover, I think that people would give my opinion on this entirely too much weight. Because literally, I don't know better than you, right? So that's it.
Are there any motifs or symbolism that you feel like fans don't often pick up on within your books?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
But that's entirely my fault. There are a lot of things that I put in my books for my own amusement, because I think it makes it a better story, or at least it makes it a more entertaining story to write. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it flies right by people, or it flies right by most people, or even nearly all people, and a few catch it and they send me, direct messages on Twitter going, I see what you did there. I'm like, yeah, I did. But for the most part, I don't really worry in my writing about people getting what I'm going for. Right. I worry about them having a good time. I want to give them something that they not only want to read, but they want to read again.
Yep.
And everything else, themes, symbolism. I do themes a lot. There's a lot of like metaphysics and stuff in my books, but it's really not. It's not why I write. I write because I want people to read me.
Yeah. And
I want them to enjoy it. And I want them to read it over and over again, the way I do with my favorite books. Yeah. And so that's what it's all there for. And some people pick up on it, and most people don't. And it is doesn't mean anything to me at all, one way or the other, as long as you're having a good time.
Well, I certainly have a good time reading your books.
Thanks. Rule 1 is never bore your audience. It's just that simple. You can get away with almost anything except being dull. The important thing is to focus on stories that thrill you. You have to just trust that whatever thrills you is also going to thrill other people. Really, whatever the specifics of that might be isn't really important, because ideas just actually aren't as important as most people think they are. A great premise can't survive crummy execution. Great execution can rescue a crummy premise. So what I think that you need to focus on is how you tell the story and how you present the characters and the situations and things like that. You can take whatever premise suits you, whether it is wildly original or teen heartbreak trying to get a date for the big dance. It doesn't matter. What matters is how you tell the story.
I always try to write so that you can't put the book down.
Mhm.
I mean, some people can. God knows there are people who start my books and find it really, really easy to stop. But I always try my hardest to make sure that there are very, very few of those people.
My last slogan is say less. As a general rule, if you say less, if you leave more to your readers' imaginations, they'll become more invested. People also get invested when the story that you're telling them asks them to participate more, gives them clues but not pictures. Never underestimate the power of a well-chosen detail. And by a well-chosen detail, I mean one, maybe two. I remember reading a John D. MacDonald novel when I was a kid, where he managed to sum up the whole kind of vibe of this scummy motel his protagonist had checked into by talking about a crack in the plaster on one wall with a water stain that followed it down like a map of the Mississippi from Wisconsin to Kentucky. Now, I'm from Illinois, so of course I knew exactly what he was talking about, but the point is that captures, there's mold, there's leaks, it's a scummy place. He doesn't need to talk about all of the scummy details. If you got one good scummy detail, the rest of the room creates itself, the rest of the environment generally creates itself in your reader's imagination. I think of myself as like a guide through the story. Metaphorically, I'm side by side with my reader. We're walking along and I'm pointing out the things that I think they need to see in order to understand what's going on the walk. The rest of the stuff, everything else in their view, is actually what they're creating. It's the difference between walking through a forest, taking a journey, and standing on a mountaintop surveying the landscape. If you can see it all at once, it's not actually a story. You need to control the release of information. Never tell your readers anything they don't have to know.
You're known to be writing stories that are not necessarily suitable for children. They are graphically violent.
My own novels are certainly not suitable for children. They're not something that's going to give a reasonably mature teenager nightmares, but I wouldn't even give one of my Star Wars books to a 5-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for them. I'm writing for what seems to me to be the core audience of Star Wars, which is the kids starting at about 12 or 13 years old and moving up through college age. I'm also trying to write books that will appeal to people who are my age, because when A New Hope first came out, I was 15 and I was a huge fan. I saw the film in the theaters. I saw the film about 25 times. And there are a lot of people like me who were huge fans when they were teenagers who've fallen away from it. And I would hope that some of the things like what Del Rey has done with the new Jedi Order might be a way of bringing back some of the grown-ups.
Yeah. Was that the reason that you were chosen to write Traitor? The fact that you wrote stories that are more graphically violent?
Well, I wouldn't go that far.
No?
I think that Del Rey and Lucasfilm liked another element of my writing. I mean, everyone talks about the fight scenes in my books. They're rather detailed. A lot of that reflects my martial arts background. And my other background is that I was an actor before I became a writer.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. And so I have a sort of very strong understanding of the dynamics of an exciting scene, whether it be an action scene or just a dialogue scene. I understand the way you make the tension rise and create suspense and things like that.
A lot of what I was trained to do was to put myself into other characters' positions, even characters that I don't initially identify with myself. And I think that contributes a lot to the way I write. I don't know how to describe it more than to say it's kind of like you just sort of imagine what it must be like to be them, how you would feel if it were happening to you, but not if it were happening to you if you were you, but how you would feel if it were happening to you if you were someone who had grown up fixing droids in a junk shop on Tatooine and had been taken away from your mother at the age of 9, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's difficult to describe, but actually it is it's easier to do than it is to talk about.
What were your reports with Lucasfilms? They proposed you the story and you actually develop on what they propose you, or do they just give you really basic lines and you go on after that?
For the NJO, there was a specific segment of the story arc that I was hired to write. So I knew what I was getting into more or less right at the beginning. But beyond that, even in Traitor, they had a place where they wanted the book to begin, or the story that I was telling to begin, and a place where they wanted it to end in terms of the development of the character. Pretty much everything in the middle was up to me.
Huh, that's good.
They said, basically make us an offer. Show us what you got. Come up with something, and we'll let you know whether or not we like it.
Okay. Could you actually had proposed them, can I kill this guy? Can I kill this guy?
No, actually, I was out at the story conference where we developed the story arc for the second half of the NJO out at Skywalker Ranch, along with Jim Luceno, Shelley Shapiro, and Troy Denning. And so we were hammering out the plot line, and Lucy Wilson had put a list up on the chalkboard of every single Jedi who had ever appeared, who is currently alive in the expanded universe. And he said, well, there are way too many of these. Who should we get rid of? And they decided that they didn't really need Ganner anymore. And I said, okay, I'll take care of him. I didn't like him. I had read it. I thought he was kind of arrogant, pompous jerk, weakling sort of person. And of course, in the process of preparing him for his exit, for his heroic exit, I came to really like him a lot. And the way he developed, especially the way Troy worked with him, and the way he developed over the course of the NJO was really, I thought, one of the nicer subtleties of the series.
Yes.
You like Lord of the Ring also? I'm asking this because of the reference you made in Traitor. That scene where Ganner is standing in front of hundreds of Yuuzhan Vong and say, none shall pass.
Yeah, I like that scene quite a bit. That was not intended as a direct reference to Lord of the Rings.
Oh, okay, I thought.
A lot of people assumed that it was. But, no, I was thinking specifically in terms of, I believe it's a Roman legend of, Horatius at the bridge.
Okay.
A single man holding off a legion because he's taken up a position where they have to come at him one at a time. Always one of my favorite stories. And I wanted to give Ganner
a great ending.
A Jedi should not go out like a punk.
Right.
And I also have some personal convictions that sometimes when you're really, really in trouble, it's because you've been trying to be somebody you're not.
Okay.
Right? And that the path to real power in Star Wars is really self-knowledge. And so what happened with Ganner is I thought, well, what if he gets in a situation where being a vain, pretentious show-off is exactly what he needs to save the day.
Okay.
Right?
Light bulb.
Right. So that Ganner's Last Stand was very powerful for me because it was him taking all of the things that everyone hated about him and saying, I don't care what you think. This is who I am. And by being that,
right,
I'm going to save the galaxy.
It's redemptive.
Yeah.
Oh.
You know, he became fully himself in that moment. He accepted.
I've got goosebumps.
All that bad part of him, all that showy,
sure,
everything he was.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, well, okay, this is all I've got. I guess that's what I'm going to use.
But you gave him guts.
Well, the situation gave him guts. Right. There is it's a phrase that from a non-Star Wars book of mine that I like to quote. I call it the gift of no tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
Right? When you don't have any, you know you're not going to get out. You don't have anything left to do except decide how you're going to die.
Yeah.
That for a certain kind of person, that isn't an object of terror. It's like, okay, it's finally okay.
It's liberating.
It's finally okay to just do whatever I want because I'm going to die anyway. I think I got this from my dad, actually, now that I think about it. If you don't mind just a little bit of a digression.
You're fine.
I was watching a movie, I think it was a Gene Hackman flick, about skydivers, stunt team skydivers. And inevitably in this kind of film, somebody's parachute doesn't open. Right? And I was watching this with my dad when I was about 10. And I was like, God, I just can't imagine anything worse than staring at the ground coming up at you and having all that time to realize you're going to die and there's nothing you can do.
Yeah, I don't like that.
and my dad said, well, you know what I would do? He said, I would put my feet together and point my toes, spread my arms, and hit the ground in the most beautiful swan dive anybody ever saw. Because if you're going out, you might as well do it with style.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's Ganner.
Wow.
He knew he was going out, so it's like, screw it. There's no point in pretending. Let's go big.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Stover, for that one. Wow.
There's a fairly famous quote in my particular field, science fiction and fantasy. Marion Zimmer Bradley said that at the beginning of your story, your character is in a bear trap. The adventure, the fun of the story is watching them struggle to get out. Now, being in a bear trap, that's, obviously just a metaphor. A lot of times the protagonist doesn't understand that they're in a bear trap until they start trying to do things and find the other constraints that are stopping them. Luke Skywalker doesn't know that his father was Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, at the beginning of episode 4. Finding out about the trap is usually a substantial part of the first act of the story. The other point about the bear trap, the reason I like that image is because it's painful, and that gives your heroes an urgency to what they're doing. In other words, they have to move because where they are hurts too much. The second act is where things get complicated, more and more complicated, until at the end of the second act, it's very clear that your protagonist cannot possibly achieve their goals. They can't win. They can't survive. The end of Act 2 is usually the sort of lowest point, where they have to do something desperate. And then Act 3, their desperation is not rewarded, makes things worse till there is no hope for them at all. So the protagonist makes a riskier move, something that takes them further out of their comfort zone. And that generates an even worse outcome. And so now your protagonist, in desperation, does something insane, and the outcome is complete catastrophe, making it impossible for your protagonist to win until they do something that they would have thought is impossible. They make a move that changes them as a person, alters their society. It's something that they didn't think was possible for them. They find a way to make it possible, thus they win.
Traitor, the original title of that book was Underworld, which they nixed because I think it was a Quinlan Voss arc in the Dark Horse comics when it was going by that name. They preempted my name. But the whole Underworld, the story was plotted as a kind of classical Greek mythology journey through the underworld, right? Stations of the underworld returning to the whole Joseph Campbell thing. So I had the whole thing, and it's a bottle story, right? It's only about the characters in there. The wider war that was going on around them, not an issue. So I didn't have to coordinate with anybody. I told them what the beginning was going to be, what the end was going to be, and I just did it. And I did the whole thing. And it was actually the last book of my career that I turned in by the deadline. It was really fun. I've never had that much fun with a book. No.
You had a lot of control in Traitor that you said that I have my book. You can't do anything to it.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit about that? You said that in the panel.
That's true. I did. I was that was part of my secret plan when I pitched the book at the story meeting at Skywalker Ranch. We basically were plotting out the second half of the new Jedi Order from Star by Star to the end. I pitched Traitor as a self-contained book, taking place literally, with Jacen and Bergere being outside the normal chronology of the whole story, where it didn't have to fit in neatly with the rest of the timeline and all the other stuff. And that was my secret weapon. Mm-hmm. So I didn't have to worry so much about what the other writers did. I did get a little bit of a turn when I heard that Aaron was setting his book on Coruscant in between Star by Star and Traitor, because I was afraid that Aaron was going to do something with Coruscant that wasn't going to fit in with Traitor, but it all turned out okay. But in general, that's what I was doing. I shouldn't say that's what I was doing. That was part of my fiendish plan to set everything up as a self-contained story where any continuity issues that might come up, I could just kind of leave aside by keeping Jacen and Bergere separate from the events of the wider galaxy.
So nobody can kind of overwrite you or explain it away.
Exactly.
So it just stays as it is, and it's always Traitor,
Yep.
and it, 5 books down in the future, nobody can say, well, we're going to go back and just rewrite this to fit in with our new story.
You never know what people are going to do. Once a book in Star Wars is written, it's out of your hands. It's work for hire, it's not my world. So, once it's done, it's done. It's their property, they can do whatever they want with it. But, all I can do is say, you know what? I did everything I could with it, I gave it my best shot, and there it is. But at the time, I did everything I could to basically keep it above the continuity wars that were causing problems for some of the other writers, just because of the way things happen when you write. You get an idea and it's like, I'm going to have to do this, and not realizing that that's going to cause a problem for somebody's book 2 or 3 books down the line, because you don't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Right? They don't know what you're doing. But once you turn your book in, all of a sudden it's a problem that they don't know about until your editor tells them, and it's very complicated.
It's great to have a self-contained book.
It is very good in this kind of series to have a self-contained book. Yes.
What were your experiences working with the other NGO authors and Del Rey's editors?
Well, my editor for Star Wars is, I guess everyone else's as well, it's Shelley Shapiro.
Yeah.
And it was just outstanding. Shelley is very supportive. She is one of the real pros in our field. She has been a science fiction editor for, I don't know how, I can't say how many years, because she doesn't want me giving away how old she is. But she's been around, and She's been with Del Rey forever, and she is a phenomenal editor. She's very supportive. She's on the writer's side. She's what we call she's a writer's editor.
Okay.
Well, what she's interested in is making a book good. There are editors who have ego issues. I've dealt with some of them in the past that have a certain vision for things that they will try and bully you into conforming to. And Shelley's not like that. All Shelley wants is a good book, and she's great.
You're the first author to have worked on both NJO and Clone Wars series. Can you tell us what are the big differences between the two series from the author point of view and the editor's point of view, maybe?
Except, of course, like the NGO Bible, which is 4,000 pages of text.
Right. Well, see, this is actually the major difference.
Okay.
In NJO, we all knew what the story was.
Okay.
Now, the story did change and develop as it went along. If they ever actually published the original Bible, you folks would be rather surprised at how divergent the story ended up being from what they had originally projected. But as the story developed, we were all kept very much in the loop and in contact with each other, and we all knew the part of the story that we had to tell to move the entire massive story arc along to the conclusion that had been agreed upon. Clone Wars is exactly the opposite. We don't really know what's going to happen. Even the writers, I know a few things about episode 3 that of course I can't share with you, but really very few. And so what we had to do is propose different ideas to LFL until they said, well, that sounds like it's in line with what we want.
Okay.
That's all. So in a sense, as an author, I'm kind of in the same situation as the Jedi are themselves. We don't really know what's going on. We just have to handle our part of it as best we can and try to keep moving forward into the future.
Okay, so you had more liberty with Shatterpoint than Traitor?
Oh, definitely.
Okay. If I'm not mistaken, you had a great idea to write a reference to the new Jedi Order in one of Mace's dream.
Well, again, I can't comment directly on that. I enjoyed writing Mace's journal quite a bit, going on through his dreams. I enjoyed doing that. That's all I can really say. It was interesting for me to think about what a Jedi's nightmares would look like. You could say that the NJO is really about the Jedi's nightmare.
Yeah, that's true.
But beyond that, I'm not going to say that was specifically intended to predict anything in the NJO.
Okay. But it was, I think the fans of the Expanded Universe liked that part of the story.
A lot of them picked up on it, yes.
Yeah.
If you look at the overall structure of the Star Wars universe as we see it in the films, things that look horrible turn out okay in the end.
Yeah.
I mean, if Anakin had not fallen to become Darth Vader, how could he have brought balance to the Force?
Yeah, that's true.
You might call it the GSSA equivalent of the old saying, God moves in mysterious ways. Or as Gandalf says in Lord of the Rings, even the wise cannot see all ends.
Yeah, for me that was very similar to what Verger is trying to teach Jacen, that being trained as a Jedi maybe doesn't permit to see all the perspective of the Force. The Force is natural. It's not. It's an instinctive in the case of Vaster, and it's learned in the case of Mace's. And I think there is a lot of parallel between the two novels.
There are some things in common there, and part of what Mace does, if you want to look at these two books as related, which I suppose they are because I wrote both of them, in some ways you can think of Mace as being the answer to some of Jacen's problems. Mace walks close to the dark side himself, as we've noticed, but Mace's commitment is always to justice and civilization, because civilization creates justice, as he says in the book. One of the ways I work is when I'm working on a story, every once in a while something just sort of comes to me and explains a lot of different things all at once. And when those sorts of things happen, I just assume that, you know, my subconscious knows better than my conscious, and I kind of go with these things that just sort of work for me. That's how I know that the story's going well. When things are not working for me, I have to go back and you know, it's a real struggle when I'm leaving something out that needs to be in, or I put in too much more than needs to be there. Then I start to get, I don't know how to describe it, confused and tired, and I just don't want to work on it anymore. And then I'll get a new idea, and all of a sudden I'm happy and excited, and it's like, well, that is.
As one of your fellow writers said, you don't want to fight the river of life. You must go with the current, not against it.
Exactly. Who was that?
I don't remember.
It's Troy Denning.
It was Troy? That's it.
Yeah.
Pretty smart fellow.
Do you think that the reason you're controversial, you sell a lot and you inspire a lot of threads on message boards because your books really get fans excited? It's not just another story about a Jedi. There's what you did with Traitor that just everybody dropped their books and ran to their computers. And do you believe what Matt Stover said? It just makes sense. Everything is so amazing. This is something we've never read before. That's why they chose you to write Revenge of the Sith, because you were not going to write a play-by-play. You were going to write, you're going to get in depth. You're going to give it emotion and intelligence.
Well, this is my goal. This is my goal all the time, is to tell the truth as I see it, is to tell the truth that I think is in Star Wars, that as near as I can tell, Mr. Lucas thinks is in Star Wars. I mean, after all, he did line edit Revenge of the Sith word for word, and so I think that in a lot of ways he and I are on the same page, and all I've really ever wanted to do with Traitor, with Shatterpoint, with Star Wars is just write Star Wars books that are as good as any other books, that are not just tie-in fiction, that aren't just science fiction, that are real fiction, that are worth something, that are worth reading, that are worth reading again. That's my only goal.
How did you get the gig for the Revenge of the Sith novelization?
I don't know exactly. I can only assume that it had something to do with my work on Traitor and Shatterpoint, because as everyone who reads Star Wars knows, I'm not nearly the kind of big writing star that Terry Brooks was when he got Phantom Menace, or Bob Salvatore was when he got Attack of the Clones. All I know is that one day, out of the blue, my editor from Random House, Del Rey, Shelley Shapiro, called me and said that she had been talking with Sue Rostany at Lucas Books, and they had been talking with Howard Rothman at Lucasfilm Licensing, and all three of them had gone to George Lucas himself, and between them all, they had decided that they thought I was the guy to write about Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side.
This is a little bit of a story. When I originally wrote that book, the dragon was not a metaphor for fear, it was a metaphor for anger. It was Anakin's rage, and it was burning through the nuclear vault that enclosed his heart. Again, over-the-top imagery. Lucas didn't like it. He didn't like it. He didn't like it because he thought it suggested the image of the dragon in there. He thought it suggested that the dark side was something that was an external force that was working with Anakin to corrupt him. And he wanted the force that corrupts Anakin to be Anakin. Right? It is, if you'll forgive me patting myself on the back, it's almost like the line out of Traitor, where Vergera tells Jacen, the only dark side you have to worry about is the one in your own heart.
You famously talk about the dark side inside, but you do mention it's not so different from how George Lucas himself talked to you about the dark side. Talk to us about the origin of that viewpoint and what compelled you to include it in your book.
Well, I always thought that it was a conceptual error to think of it as like the devil in a Manichaean universe.
Sure.
I always thought that the Force is the Force, and the dark side is part of the Force. That's why there's no light side of the Force, right? There's the Force, and then the dark side. The dark side is the stuff that stems from natural animal instincts to control, to dominate.
Yeah, or base instincts.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Wow.
And that was my thing. And also, as he himself said, that he was kind of inspired by that sort of Taoist sort of thing. A lot of my books are kind of metaphysical. I think that's why I was an easy, not metaphysical in the usual sense, but one of my concerns is the way reality works. I like thinking about, if there are rules, what are the rules? And I spent a lot of time thinking about the dark side and thinking about everything we know about what George Lucas thought about the dark side. And what you always see is that the dark side struck me as the impulse to control. Right?
Okay.
That's why the Jedi frown on, casual use of the Force. Obi-Wan would be very cross if he saw I was doing this.
Sure.
Right? Because power to do good eventually becomes just power.
Okay.
Right? That's their theory. That's why they frown on that, because it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
You use your power to make this better, and you think, well, with the same power I can make that better, and then I can make that better. Pretty soon you're organizing society around your preferences because you are superhuman, and you have the power to make people do what you want them to do.
Yeah. Anakin says, "We'll make them obey."
Right. We'll make them obey. That's the end. That's what the dark side is.
Well, you talked about fear the other night, and in Traitor, Vergere and Jacen get into a lot dealing with fear.
Fear is the path to the dark side.
Yeah.
Overcoming fear is one of the great tasks of every Jedi.
Hey, you made a great speech at the end of
the
second panel about fear.
Well, thank you. But I truly believe that this is one of the great tasks of every Jedi, of every person, every human being on our planet, is that fear is what stops us from doing nearly everything that is valuable in our lives. And if you get past fear, you can accomplish astonishing things. And when you remember that fear is of the dark side, that is the first step to conquering it. And when you remember that people who are trying to sell you fear are using the dark side, that's the second step to getting over fear. And I guess if I don't think of myself as an aggressive person, I'm a light sider. I use the Force only for knowledge and defense.
You show that even the light side, especially with Mace, when he was talking about his fighting style in Shatterpoint, that it's a very fine line. He almost uses the aggressiveness and his fear, or trying to conquer fear, to make him stronger. To stay on the light side, because he says it's almost like he's trying to harness it and control it, and that actually makes him better.
Well, yeah, it's something that comes from martial arts is if you can't overcome your limitations, you have to find a way to make your limitation into an advantage, make it into a strength. If you can't eliminate it, you have to find a way to use it. And that's Mace's strategy. And it works for him up to a point. Up to right about the middle of the second.
How do you compare Luke's path to Anakin's path?
Well, it's really very simple.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a choice between giving and taking. Luke chooses to give, Anakin chooses to take, right up until the end.
Okay.
I have a personal fan theory about why Mr. Lucas organized the two trilogies the way he did. That Luke rises through love, right? It's his connections, the fact that he cares, and Anakin falls through fear. So it's the whole love and fear thing. And so when I approach Luke, his main thing that polished him up for me was that he genuinely cares. He's a genuinely, deeply kind person.
Yes.
And it pains him when he has to use violence.
Luke's victory, his achievement, does not come from his ability to whip ass. Because what I think the most important thing about Luke is his belief that people can change if you give them the opportunity. If you give someone a chance to do the right thing, even if they've always done the wrong thing before, there's always a chance that, if you give it to them, they'll do the right thing. I like a lot of things about Luke, but that, I think, really exemplifies what I like best about him, what I admire most about him as a character.
Now that you've done New Jedi Order, and now you've done prequel trilogy, or the prequel era, what did you prefer writing? Do you like fleshing out the Star Wars story as for the movies, or do you like going beyond and creating whole new eras?
Well, Traitor was by far the easiest of the books to write. Shatterpoint was probably the most interesting, and Revenge of the Sith was the most rewarding. So, I don't know. I guess I don't really have a preference.
Aside from Revenge of the Sith, are there any of your books that you'd like to have adapted into a live action?
No, Shatterpoint. Traitor, I don't think works without the context of the New Jedi Order. I mean, I know there are some people I know who have just read that because they were fans of mine, not NJO fans, and they still like it. But I feel like without that context, it's not that really that powerful a story. If you didn't know Anakin and watch what happened to him in Star by Star. Yeah. If you didn't know that, you don't know where Jacen is at the beginning of this book. Because I don't do backstory. If I can avoid it. I hate exposition. I hate it. I try never to tell people anything more than what they need to know to understand what's going on right now. And so, Traitor, yeah, favorite Star Wars book, fun to write, but I don't think it would work that well outside.
My fiction is not purely commercial. It's very personal to me and generally reflects deeply held views about reality and etc.
When I finish a book, it's like this is not only a baby that I have brought forth from my own body, but it's also a sculpture in which every single word is exactly where it needs to be, and no more than are absolutely necessary, and no less. And so no changes should be made whatsoever. Now, of course, this is not true. You understand? This is just how I feel about it. You can't please everybody. I just try and write it the way I would want it to be if I were reading it instead of writing it.
My first Star Wars book outsold my first own personal book 20 or 30 to 1. It's they sell a ton of copies, and like many writers, my real ambition is to have a lot of people read my work, and so I jumped on it. It turned out well. It was my first book on the New York Times bestsellers list, and so they hired me to do 3 more, including the novelization for episode 3, which is my biggest selling book of my career so far.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for decades after I started selling books, I was maintaining a day job, mostly to cover health insurance, pre-Obamacare.
Right.
And one of my last jobs, I was working as an exterminator. I was an Orkin man. Okay. It's an interesting job in a lot of ways. And my now ex-wife referred to it as my license to kill. And I'm like, I take more lives before lunch than James Bond did in his entire career. But what was funny is I had a job at a fairly nice house in the suburbs, and I was there killing their mice and their ants. And I saw that they were huge Star Wars fans. Mm-hmm. and they had Traitor and Shatterpoint and Revenge of the Sith on their shelf. And I'm like, hey, did you like those? And they're like, yeah. It's like Shatterpoint. That's my favorite Star Wars novel. And I said, oh, that's cool. I wrote that. And he's like, you did not. And I said, yeah, I actually did. And he took the book out of I had my author photo in the back. He took the book out of the bookcase and he opened it up and he looked at it and he goes, that's not you. And I'm like, yeah, sort of is.
It's fantastic.
Yep.
How much of a fan were you before writing a Star Wars novel, and how much of a fan are you now?
That's a very interesting question. I suppose I'm actually a bigger fan now than I was when I started writing Traitor.
Mm-hmm.
At least I should say when I signed the contract
Okay.
to write Traitor. What has happened is, in watching the NJO develop and working in the universe and starting to understand the possibilities of storytelling
Mm-hmm.
in the GFFA and, dealing with the Force and Jedi and smugglers and pirates and all the rest, I've become more and more interested in it. It's one of these things. I suppose this is the mark of a really powerful concept, because the more you think about it, the more there is to think about.
Mm-hmm.
You don't run out of stories in the GFFA.
No.
That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. You know how the NGO series will end, right? So since you obviously cannot tell us the storyline, how much of the Star Wars fans will be surprised?
I don't know. By the time you get to the end of a story like this,
Mm-hmm.
you have a pretty good idea of how things are going to go. The details, how we actually get there,
Mm-hmm.
I think some of those will be quite surprising. I know Jim Luceno is a really good writer,
Mm-hmm.
and he can pull things out of his hat that will, I think, it maybe shock some people along the way. I don't think the ending is going to surprise people too much.
Okay.
But it might. I'm not entirely sure what people are expecting.
If you had another chance to work on the Star Wars universe, what story would you like to tell?
Ooh. Now that's one you should have asked me. You should have warned me about that question. I have to think about that or really come up with something. The story that I would most like to tell would probably be something set long after the NJO.
Okay.
Would be like the final adventure of Luke, Han, and Leia.
Okay.
Not necessarily their deaths
Mm-hmm.
necessarily, but just like I would be interested to write about them when they're like really old,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still heroes. They still, have to saddle up and help save the galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be an interesting story to write.
And it would be interesting to see their children.
That's
Their
it.
children as
Yeah.
fully grown adults.
Yeah.
Yeah, Grandpa Luke.
Grandpa Luke, yeah.
Luke, yeah.
And the final question is, what is your go-to Star Wars quote?
Probably the one that I use the most often is legitimately in line with the kind of Taoist underpinnings of the Force, is try not, do or do not. There is no try.
Yeah.
Saying, don't make an attempt.
Right.
Do what you intend to do. If it fails, okay.
Right.
But, you're not just trying something. You're doing something.
Right.
I believe that there's no point in doing something if you're not going to do it as hard as you can.
Wow. And the same thing is happening to me in this interview that always happens to me when I read your books, is I feel like everything I believed about the universe has been turned on its head. So thank you for that.
That is literally my purpose for being on this earth.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Silver.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun.
I majored in English literature in college. I studied James Joyce's Ulysses. And then I noticed that Cold Mountain, there's lots of other books that kind of retell that story. And I knew Coppola had done Apocalypse Now that was the same story as Heart of Darkness. So I thought I was always trying to turn Star Wars into real literature. And at one of the meetings, I said, well, can't we do, a future of like the Star Wars Ulysses story? But nobody bit that one. But the closest it came to was Matthew Stover's Traitor book.
Oh my gosh, incredible
Which was
book.
Based on the Heart of Darkness, if you ask me. And so that was my favorite book because I felt like finally it was like a crossover literate Star Wars novel. Not that they weren't all.
No, I love that. And, Matthew Stover, you don't get me started on how incredible he is. That Traitor and the Revenge of the Sith novelization are like incredible just books in general, not just incredible Star Wars books.
Were there any unexpected influences, things that people wouldn't expect, but were strong influences throughout the series?
I think for me, the influence that was strongest was Traitor, because everything else we were doing was sort of conventional. I mean, it was conventional storytelling and everything. So when, Matt came in with that, it was like, wow, this turns everything on its ear. So that was the big unexpected thing for me in the series. Kind of a game changer, really.
So that influenced your book a lot then?
It did, yeah.
And it's so cool because I think Traitor influenced Force Heretic as well, and Destiny's Way. I mean, it was a book that was constantly, and to this day is still interpreted in different fashions.
That's the other thing about that, that's a real achievement when you can do that and keep people talking about it and having different voices weigh in on the meaning. It's great. Yeah. Really, he's such a talented writer, and I think he brought a lot of his acting ability into his writing. I mean, it's just a lot of drama in his work.
Today on the show, I had the honor of chatting with Mr. Walter John Williams, the author of the new Jedi Order series, Destiny's Way.
It's great to be here.
What was your first interest into, we'll say, space opera or fantasy? Like, when was that moment?
As soon as I knew what a writer was, I wanted to be that. So I was maybe 4 or 5 years old because I couldn't even write yet. I didn't know how to write, and I didn't know how to read. So I would dictate stories to my parents who would write them down for me. And then I get out my crayons and illustrate them. And fortunately, few of those efforts have survived. I remember the first science fiction novel I read. It was Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Robert Heinlein, which I still think is his best book. Heinlein, Clarke, and Asimov were the 3 big names when I started reading this. And of course, there are plenty of other authors that I became acquainted with, including E.E. Doc Smith, who I think inspired Star Wars in many ways. He had a series of books about the Lensmen, who were essentially Jedi, and they were sort of a special police unit, special unit of soldiers, something like that, were trying to defend the galaxy against another galaxy. And they had psychic powers that allowed them to communicate with each other and see what was going on. And they were zooming around in spaceships and fighting battle moons that very much resembled the Death Star. And this is written in the 20s and 30s. Right. Wow. I think George Lucas was exposed to this at a certain point and just thought it was cool. You can trace both Star Wars and Star Trek back to a couple of writers in the 20s who kind of defined the form.
How much of a Star Wars fan were you before writing a Star Wars novel?
I'm very much a fan, and in fact, I saw the first film on the first day at the first showing.
Oh, that's good.
Local theater, and it was like 11:30 in the morning.
Okay.
And I figured no one would be there, and I turned up, on time to see the film, and the line was huge, and all my friends were in it. And I hadn't talked to them. I sort of was one of those magical things where everybody suddenly decides to go to the same movie at the same hour throughout the world.
Yeah.
And so I saw A New Hope probably 14 times. And
oh God.
The movie since then.
How did you get chosen to write the Star Wars novel?
The editor, Shelley Shapiro, I assume, knew my other work and thought that my talents would be useful in the Star Wars universe. So she approached my agent a couple of years ago, just sort of asking in a theoretical way if I might be interested, and I replied that in a theoretical way I might. And then suddenly it got very concrete. I heard nothing from Shelley for, about 6 months. And then packages started arriving on my doorstep.
The people in charge decided they wanted to get some new names involved. And mine came up. And usually I don't get a chance to do side projects like this because I'm committed, sometimes for years in advance. But this came just at a moment when I didn't have any other projects in the pipe and I could devote myself to it.
How much effort did you have to put in to catch up and to not miss out all the things that had gone on before and to understand what you were writing about?
Well, that was that was very challenging because as soon as I agreed to do it, boxes of material started appearing on my doorstep.
Federal Express got very busy. There were copies of all of the earlier NJO books. I got all of the reference books, the encyclopedias, the illustrated encyclopedias, the guide to droids, the guide to planets, the guide to people, everything. I looked at the movies again. There was by the time the Bible got to me, this is the Bible for the NJO series. By the time it got to me, it was like 180 pages.
Wow.
So it was a novel in itself, just to read the Bible. All full of useful facts, all of which I badly needed to know.
Did you ever read a Star Wars book before at all? Were you kind of aware of them, or were you?
I was certainly aware because I knew people who had written them, but I hadn't read them. No, but actually, I was quite impressed with the stuff that I read. Just how comprehensively they had developed the Star Wars universe. As a collaborative effort, because I know that's hard, because I've done collaborative projects like Wildcards, and there are specific challenges for things like that.
So did you read the books?
I read the first one. I read the first one. The rest I didn't have time to read, but I skimmed them all. Like, I delivered my Star Wars book by the deadline, but I think 3 books before mine were all late. So I never got to read them before I wrote my own book because they weren't complete. Yeah. And had I known what was going to be in those books, I probably would have adjusted my book a bit.
Well, I'll be honest with you, sir.
Okay.
Your book picked up perfectly from Traitor was the book before yours by Matthew Stover, and it just the flow of it was perfect. I thought. So that amazes me that you didn't get
I had them on outline.
Okay.
I had the outline that had originally been approved by Lucasfilm, but the books changed a lot.
Yeah, there must be a lot of editing to do.
And so there were a lot of things that surprised me. Jacen Solo having a boyfriend, that was new.
Yeah, kind of a boyfriend, yeah.
And I hadn't put him in the book, and because I didn't know he existed particularly.
Okay.
So I had to do it was one of many retroactive reality checks where I had to go back and change things.
Okay.
What year did you start in the project? How far into it were you brought into, or were you brought in at the beginning when they had those giant meetings?
No, I was brought in a little later. I did fly out to Skywalker Ranch for meetings, but it was me, it was Sean Williams, and it was the people from the Lucasfilm, and a rather substantial crew for that. But by that point, they had the arc of the series hammered out, and they had some idea of what was going to happen in each volume. And I was very glad I was handed the volume that I was, because it enabled me to really advance the story in some significant ways. So I was very pleased with that.
We were talking about this. It's possibly the book that has the most plot content, and Star by Star is pretty much the only other one that contains quite that level of depth.
After I agreed, flew out to Lucasfilm for meetings with some of the other authors and editor and all the folks at Lucasfilm, and sort of hammered out an outline. And because this was like a 20-book arc, New Jedi Order, there were certain things that had to happen in my book. Certain people had to die. There had to be a big battle at the end. The Republic had to win the battle. Anything else that happened was kind of up to me. And my interpretations of the characters were kind of up to me. So I was able to, have some genuine creative input in this. I was there for 2 nights. Wow. And there was the middle day was meetings all day into the evening. And that was great. There were a whole bunch of creative people that were contributing to that, and that was pretty nifty.
There is an arc for the whole series, and that's laid out in the Bible. And so there were several major things that I had to have happen in my book. I had to have the first big victory against the Yuuzhan Vong. No problem there. I had to have Luke confront Bergere, the strange Jedi from the past.
Yeah.
I had to have the relationship between Jaina and Jacen Solo develop in the particular way that it did. But pretty much everything else was up to me.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
There were about half a dozen things I had to have in the book, and everything else I got to make up.
As far as that goes, you basically had the challenge, I guess, of having to be the writer to take the story from some really dark tales, Star by Star and Traitor seem to be pretty dark, and essentially change the path to more of a hopeful one. As far as you said, you had freedom to write whatever you wanted past the constraints of just them giving you the major plot points that had to happen. As far as that goes, what events in the novel were on that list of things that you absolutely had to include?
Let's see. Well, Shimura had to arrive at Yuuzhan Tar. Jacen had to make his escape. The Jedi Council had to be reestablished with a government that was capable of carrying on the war. The Chiss bioweapon, Alpha Red, had to be introduced. The name was mine, but the rest of it was part of the outline from way back. And there had to be a significant victory over the Yuuzhan Vong by the end.
Right.
Now, did you get to pick any of these characters to bring in?
Yeah, I brought in most of them. I mean, aside from, Savan La had to be there and had to die.
Yep.
Vergere had to die. Shimura had to show up, and you had to deal with the aftermath of the fall of the capital, right? And the beginnings of the Republic striking back.
It felt like this should have been a movie. If that makes
well, yeah.
I read on the official site interview that you didn't know much about the expanded universe before signing up for Destiny's Way.
No, I was quite surprised at some of the events. So sort of everyone had gotten married and had kids while I wasn't looking. I'd seen and enjoyed the films, of course, but fortunately Lucasfilm has a very good database.
Okay.
And I was able to get a lot of information from there. Because I write with a certain amount of sensory detail. I need to know what color their eyes are.
Okay.
And how many freckles they've got.
Wow. That's a lot of details.
And what sort of rare gases they're breathing on their home planet and so on. So that was really useful. And of course when the information wasn't available, I just made it up. So.
How hard was it to try and get into the head of very well-known, very well-loved characters, but in a different stage of life where their personalities have changed?
Yeah, that was tough. Fortunately, Jacen had been the subject of Traitor, the immediately previous book. Right, so I didn't have to deal with him too much. All I had to deal with was his working through the changes that had happened to them in that. So I wanted a scene of him healing, so that I put him out on the reef and gave him some scuba gear and had him paddle around and work out stuff in his head. I just wanted a healing scene. I got to have scenes on a water planet, and I do scuba, and I used to teach small boat sailing. A lot of that background was useful in describing the sorts of things that happen there, that happen in a water environment. I'm just familiar with it.
There's a scene where Jacen is diving a coral reef, right, on this alien world. That comes right out of my own life. You're there, you're looking at the corals and the fish and everything, and you realize that everything you're looking at is alive. The things that look like rocks are alive, the fish are alive, the plants are alive, the animals that look like plants are alive. And that was, when I realized that was quite a revelation, actually.
Why is all the romance between Jacen and Danny?
Danny Quee, yeah.
And Danny Quee. In Star by Star, Traitor hinted at some romance between Jacen and Tenel Ka. What do you think about that?
Well, for all 10LK fans out there, I really didn't have a romance between Jacen and.
They're more of friends.
Jacen is kind of clueless in that department, and even if Danny was attracted to him, I'm not sure he'd notice. And if you recall the conversation that he had about this with Jaina, that he sort of denied that this whole thing even existed. So there's still hope for 10LK.
But she's queen of the Ape Consortium.
He's an interesting in-law for a queen of 68 worlds.
Jaina, I came up with the Sword of the Jedi for her as part of her, because it occurred to me that any actual human being by now would be experiencing combat fatigue. And Jaina has a twin bond in the connection with the Force and so on, which could allow her to keep it together longer. But she was literally in the war from day one and had got to be a witness to a whole lot of catastrophes, including the death of her brother. And so I wanted to have her react to all of that. So that was her arc. And so those were things that I was very concerned about.
What do you think about the expanded universe characters such as Corin Horn? Do you believe they're a little bit harder to write about or easier since they had already many people working on them and giving more details about them?
The ones that aren't so established, Corin and Jaina and Jacen, the ones who didn't come from the films are actually easier to write about.
Okay.
Because they're just not so set in the...
We see Corin Horn as the leader of Rogue Squadron. Where's Gavin, Darklighter?
Oh, well, he's doing very important other military work elsewhere.
Okay. That's how to...
It's a very simple answer. It explains it all.
I think I originally meant to imply that Corin was just flying with Rogue Squadron, not in command of Rogue Squadron, but somehow, during the course of the period in which I was writing it, I just got confused.
Okay. But it's...
Officially speaking, Gavin is just been promoted, and he's doing really important stuff somewhere else. The problem is that the Star Wars Extended Universe has too many interesting characters.
Yes.
And so I was kind of glad when New Jedi Order started thinning them out.
But when you have 25 years of Star Wars history without almost any character dying... for sure there will be a lot of interesting characters.
Right. Someone has to die eventually.
Well, yeah, I have to wonder what's going to happen to Han. I mean, he's pushing 60.
Having seen the films, having seen the Star Wars films, going through for the first time and having to write for Han, Luke, Leia, these characters that we'd seen in the films, but which that were events taking place about 25 years or so ago, and having to pick them up at a later part of their life. Was it difficult to put the maturity to them, or did it seem like you could just grab the characters from the films and almost transplant the personalities?
I could hear their voices, so that helped. Han was pretty easy. You could say that Han hasn't matured all that much, but his core attitudes have pretty much remained unchanged. Even though he's been through a lot of grief lately. But Luke was very hard. And that surprised me. I didn't expect Luke to be as difficult as he was. But it's very difficult to write somebody who is masterful and controlled and thoughtful and incredibly powerful and darn near perfect. Because the things that make people fun and interesting to write are their more human qualities, not their superhuman qualities.
Right.
What was the biggest difficulty in writing Destiny's Way?
I think it was just getting the characters right.
Okay, yeah, you got a lot of a big cast of character.
Yeah, there's everybody from the movies plus all their boyfriends and girlfriends and children and their children's friends and so on that you have to get in there, and you still have to make the original characters interesting. To my surprise, it was hard to make Luke interesting because he's just become so masterful. And he's a Jedi master all the time, and he's almost never is able to show weakness or a wrong thought or a wrong emotion. So I really had to labor with him to make him an interesting character.
And a lot of people know Luke pretty well, and you don't want to make any mistakes.
No, but I've been hearing from the Luke fans. There are fans who are very specific to Luke Skywalker, and I've been hearing from them, and I did a good job, so I'm pretty pleased with that.
Staying on the whole character thing for just another second here, one thing that kind of goes along with that topic, we also had Rodan, the possible chief of state candidate who makes a good speech. It would be interesting to conduct a cost-benefit analysis to discover whether the Jedi are in fact worth the resources the government has devoted to you. But my point is this. You call yourselves protectors of the Republic. Very well. But I have looked very carefully at the Constitution of our government, and there is no Office of the Protectors of the Republic. What exactly are you, Skywalker? You aren't military. We have a military. You aren't a diplomat. We have diplomats. You aren't a peace officer or a judge. We have those. So why exactly do we need you? Senator Fayo Rodan. He's basically standing down Luke, saying, why do we need you if we have offices for this and this and this, and you're trying to fulfill all these roles, find something official or not? Did you base that on any particular historical situations or political figures around now?
What I was trying to do was looking really hard at the Star Wars universe and figuring out why people in the New Republic hate the Jedi.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because so far as I can tell, there's been no reason why Rodan and Poe and all those people hate the Jedi, other than the fact that we're supposed to think of them as bad guys.
Mm-hmm.
And my decision was these were highly intelligent statesmen and politicians who admittedly, had their own interests. They were hungry for power and all of that. But they had to have a reason for hating the Jedi as thoroughly as they did, or at any rate mistrusting them, if not hating them. And so I decided to have Rodan actually give his reasons. It had never been done up to that point. And I thought the reasons are pretty good ones, if you think in political terms.
Right.
Which is, firstly, the New Republic has stuff that does everything that you do. Every time a Jedi gets involved, there's violence.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, trust us, we're honest, we're good people, but the last time we trusted you, you gave us Darth Vader.
Yeah.
So, it seems that these are perfectly rational reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And we think the Jedi are good because we know them. I mean, we've read all the books, we've seen the movies. But if you haven't spent, the last 65 books being in Luke's head and knowing that he's a good guy, and somebody like Kip Duran comes along and blows up billions of people, and Luke assures you, well, don't worry, he won't do that again. How do you build the kind of trust that allows you to say that?
Right.
So I thought, if the Jedi are sort of in play politically, there has to be a rationale for being in opposition to them.
I can tell you I really like the fact that Luke had to go meet someone and discuss the fact that the Jedis were not that much liked by the rest of the Republic, and so on and so on. That's something that I think was really, really interesting to bring into a novel. It occurred to me that throughout the new Jedi Order series, the Jedi are meeting a whole lot of opposition from major figures in the Republic. And the implication was they were just bad guys or they were just very stupid. And I think you've got to be the president of the Republic by being very stupid. So so I thought there probably had to be a reason for it. And the reason is that the Jedi are sort of an extra legal source. They're not cops anymore. They're not the military. They're not diplomats. They act
they can
very impulsively on their own. They have all of this weaponry, and the last time the Republic let them do what they want, they got Darth Vader.
Yeah.
So there's
that's
a lot
good
of
point.
That's it. Them right now.
One of the subjects that you mentioned as far as one of the things that had to be done was the new High Council and its membership. And that's been a subject of a lot of message board discussions and fan debates. For both who's on it and the idea of having it split down the middle between Jedi and non-Jedi, which we never saw in the prequel or anything like that. Did you get to have any input on who would and wouldn't be on the council, or was that all predetermined before you wrote them?
No, that was done I flew out to Lucasfilm at the very beginning of this project to meet with Shelley Shapiro and Sue Rostoni and several of the other Lucasfilm people. And with Sean Williams, who is co-writing the 3 books that follow mine,
right.
the the Fourth Heretic series.
Yeah.
And we all put our heads together and came up with the names. And having the Jedi Council be split between Jedi and non-Jedi was, in fact, my idea.
Oh, okay. Now, was that, aside from maybe just regular logical reasons, was that based on anything in particular, as far as a checks and balance system or anything like that you?
Well, I did have checks and balances in mind, but I realized that, okay, Luke, having realized that Fjord Rodan, though on the wrong side of the debate, nevertheless had a point, had to reestablish the trust in the Jedi on the part of the professional political class, which had been lost. And that in order to do that, you have to bring them into the process somehow. Now, the High Council, as it is currently established, may change after the war.
Right.
Right now, this is an extreme emergency measure. There may be more Jedi in the future. There may be fewer politicians. There may be subgroups where it's just Jedi who are concerned with promotion and training and the stuff that the politicians don't know anything about. And there may be a subdivision of the High Council that just deals with political matters and that just includes the politicians. Or, there may be a huge explosion because this is, after all, the Star Wars universe, and huge explosions sort of go with the course.
You introduce an all-new concept for the Jedi Council, 6 Jedi and 6 non-Jedi, and also a government where the power of each planet would be very clear and precise. You even bring up the idea of a new constitution for the next author to work with. How did you bring all those ideas together to create what will probably be a cohesive government from a fallen one? And by the way, the new name, you probably know, will be the Galactic Alliance, replacing the New Republic.
One of the things that I was required to do for this particular book was to establish a stable government, reestablish the Jedi Council. And to do that, I had to put both of these on a sort of more rational footing, given that a lot of the main politicians just hated the Jedi and distrusted them. I had to find some way of disarming that trust. And so composing the Jedi Council, not just of figures that are drawn from the Jedi Order, but also from all of the organizations that would feel threatened by the Jedi, say the military and the President's office and the intelligence service and the diplomatic service and so on. Seemed a way to do it. Now, of course, what this means is that the Jedi are going to get a lot more involved in day-to-day politics. So that's the downside of it. But Luke understood this when he established the new Jedi Council, or the High Council as it's now called.
But the President still have veto over everything.
Yes, it's an advisory council. Presidents can follow their advice or not.
But that was probably a special situation, so...
I expect that this situation will evolve. And so fortunately, I did not have to draw up a new constitution. Public. But I just sort of tried to point at some of the directions.
Yeah, it will probably be developed.
There doesn't seem to be any clear distinction in the New Republic between the executive and the legislative branch. So they're always interfering in one another's terrain and causing chaos. I think probably a federal system would be a little more sensible.
How would you feel if Del Rey would come back to you and ask you to actually write the Constitution?
I would ask how much I'd be paid for that. That's a bigger job than it sounds.
You also had a chance, it seemed like, to return Lando to some of his more seedy roots with the politicking to try to get Cal almost actually elected chief of state and all the things behind the scenes there. Having looked at the previous materials to get ready to write this one, was there a conscious effort there to put him back more toward the character he was in the classics, or was that just how you usually kept him in mind and he just kind of naturally came out? How did that come about?
Well, he was with Talon Card,
right?
Who is another guy who's never entirely been on the right side of the law. So I felt the two of them together in this situation would display some of their former skills in dealing with things in an illicit way. And if you'll notice, they do maintain a plausible deniability.
Right.
Throughout this whole thing. I say, well, we just gave you the supplies. That wasn't a bribe. That was,
Yeah, it just happened to push you in our direction.
Yeah.
Okay.
You reintroduced the Imperial Remnant in Destiny's Way. We know they will have a role to play in the last stretch of NJO. Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about it, and what can you tell us?
The Imperial Remnant, I think it is fair to say, will not fare well.
Okay.
In the next few books. So they're going to get a lot more involved in the Yuuzhan Vong War, and probably a lot more involved than they want to be. So I heard from Sean Williams, who is writing the next trilogy of books, when he had a chance to read Destiny's Way, he said, "Oh boy, that roof garden's just going to get blown up. Thank you for creating that."
Okay, for me, the most emotional scene in Destiny's Way was the knighting ceremony of the young Jedi. It almost made me cry.
Good.
How do you write an intense emotional scene? Do you base yourself on personal experiences? How did you approach it?
Actually, what I did in that case was I tried to channel George Lucas.
Okay.
Tried to think of all the big, impressive ceremonial scenes in the Star Wars films.
Okay, yeah, the end of A New Hope and
try to distill them into one big moment. If you actually read that scene, it's written very cinematically.
It's really the little word that Luke tells every Jedi that is really emotional, with the Anakin picture above the stage and everything. So
yeah. I tried to bring in everything. I was totally shameless in that scene. I'm very proud of it. The part where Luke speaks to Jaina and proclaims that she is the sword of the Jedi was a total improvisation.
You could almost hear the music of the twin suns setting in the background.
The ceremonial music.
Exactly. I had not planned that. The Force just made me do it.
Cool.
Wrote that scene, and then I immediately emailed everybody and said, "Do you hate this?" Everybody who had to write a book after me, I emailed Lucasfilm, I emailed Shelley in New York, and everybody liked it, fortunately. So
that's super.
That was sort of too big a change to actually do on my own, but I'm so relieved that they approved of that.
Yeah, but for me, it's the best emotional scene in all the Star Wars novel history, more than Chewbacca's death or Anakin's death.
And trust me, to get to this guy, you had to write it well.
I was told I had to have a knighting ceremony, and who got to be knighted. So I wanted Luke to have sort of a private moment in this public ceremony with everybody in the cast. And I got up to the scene where Jaina gets knighted, and Luke sort of takes her aside to give her a private word, and I had no idea what it was, and then it just rolled out of me. So the Force made me write that scene. That's all I can say. I hadn't planned it. It just happened.
I have to say that particular moment wasn't me. I wasn't in charge at that point. The Force took over and dictated it.
Okay.
I had no idea what Luke was going to say until that moment. And it felt like another power had told me what he was going to say. It was a really eerie feeling.
Really?
Yeah.
That's incredible to hear, sir.
Yeah. Well, imagine my surprise. I'm Mr. Plot Boy. I plan out everything in advance in incredible detail, and I had not planned this.
Okay.
So I think I was just so into the Star Wars milieu at that point that I was taking dictation from the Force.
Now, has this happened to you in other?
Not like this, no. Nothing this unprecedented, I don't think.
Which character did you especially enjoy working with?
I think Han Solo.
Han Solo?
Is still my favorite because with him, he doesn't have to be serious.
Where the nostril of
Master all the
Palpatine
time, and the other folks are dealing with some pretty serious issues, which isn't to say that Han isn't. Yeah. But he has that kind of irreverent humor.
And he cracked a couple of jokes, like the nostril of Palpatine and I don't remember the other.
Unfortunately, some of Han's better jokes got cut. Not because they were too irreverent or anything, but just because they happened in the wrong context.
Okay.
Anything you can tell us without your implant troubling?
In the very first scene, there's a battle between Han and Leia on the Millennium Falcon, group of Yuuzhan Vong that have ambushed them, and I had the Yuuzhan Vong commander, contact Han and order him to surrender. And Han was just coming back with all of these jokes. He said, "Well, okay, you're going to say surrender, and I'm going to say no, and you're going to say surrender, or you will be destroyed." And I will say, come and get it, scale face, and then so I just sort of walked it through the dialogue between the very typical evil villain and
the insult
wise-ass
exchanging
hero, and it turned out that the Yuuzhan Vong have no way of communicating with another.
So basically,
well, I had to cut the whole scene, even though I quite loved it and everyone else did.
What was your first impression when you were introduced to the Yuuzhan Vong?
I thought they were pretty interesting villains. Actually, when I was first introduced to them in the very first book of the series, I thought, how are the good guys going to beat these guys? I mean, they seemed
to be invincible.
Invincible, yeah. They just had too much stuff, and they'd obviously were absolutely ready to conquer this galaxy. So I couldn't figure out how to beat them.
Now we need to talk about Alpha Red. First, can you explain what it is?
It's a killer virus that was designed to destroy the Yuuzhan Vong and all their works.
Okay, yeah, everything.
They found that there was a genetic. Firstly, that the Yuuzhan Vong genetics were very similar to those found elsewhere
in the normal universe.
Galaxy far, far away in our home galaxy.
Yeah.
But that there was one unique difference in every Yuuzhan Vong and in every Yuuzhan Vong organism. So it was a biological weapon designed to attack through that specific difference.
Okay.
So it would attack only Yuuzhan Vong and no one else.
Yeah. And it kills in 4 weeks?
Well, it was intended, if it got proper distribution, to kill the entire species in 4 weeks, along with all their plants and their houses and their ships. And,
that would have been so bad.
Was there any one particular one of those predetermined plot points that seemed hardest or most challenging to write from your point of view?
Yeah, probably the Alpha Red bioweapon, because that was completely out of left field. It hadn't been prefigured in any of the earlier books. And indeed, that's sort of how it appeared. I mean, it's been a secret project that's been going on all along. But none of the point of view characters in any of the earlier books had an inkling of it.
Right.
So I tried to give as much foreshadowing as I could before it sort of popped out of existence about 2/3 of the way through the book, and then all the characters had to deal with it.
On that topic, just on the topic of Alpha Red, that's one of the things that popped up as kind of a controversial theme running through the book, was the possibility that this I mean, we've never seen the heroes of the Star Wars galaxy in quite the position where they would be willing to use essentially genocide if necessary to win a battle. Given the political climate these days, we've got the anthrax scares and everything that's going on right now with Iraq, and whether they have weapons of mass destruction, biological, chemical, etc. Do you have a particular stance or side you would take as far as the debate in Star Wars of whether or not to use that type of a bioweapon?
I would never use that kind of weapon except in an absolute last resort situation, and I don't think the Republic had reached that yet.
Right.
Perhaps if the government hadn't got itself together, and hadn't made a place for the Jedi, then if I were in the position of Div Scour, who as head of this project, I might have been tempted to use it. But the problem with ultimate weapons, as we found with atomic weapons, is that technology is not exclusive. There were no atomic secrets. There have been spies that have been prosecuted for giving away atomic secrets, and a whole lot of security apparatus developed preserving atomic secrets. But the atomic secret, the big atomic secret, was given away when we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima. The big atomic secret was we can build an atomic bomb.
Yeah.
After that, everything's an engineering problem, which is what I had Danny Quee say in the book when she was in a scene with Jacen, which is that she had discovered a whole lot of useful things about how the Yuuzhan Vong communicate, but once she discovered them, it was in the hands of the engineers to actually build the stuff. She was made redundant. She'd made the discoveries. They said, "Thank you very much. You're off the payroll." And now we're going to hire a bunch of engineers.
At the end of the book, I was really glad that you didn't use it. We already had enough weapon of mass destruction in the expanded universe. But will we see Alpha Red used in the next year's novel?
I don't know.
Okay. Maybe a possible mutation.
I have no idea what's going to happen with that. That was one of the plots that was in the Bible.
Okay. So it will be mentioned again.
To be honest with you, I don't remember whether it was mentioned again in the Bible or not. I just know I had to deal with it in Destiny's Way.
Okay. I hope they find a way not to use it.
Yeah, me too. The Vong are too much fun to write to have them all different.
Yeah, we finally have like a supervillain.
What inspired you the scratching pestilence on Yuuzhan? That was pretty funny, I thought.
I enjoyed that. Yeah. Well, the fact was that Jacen was sort of in mental contact
with the world brain,
with the vom-forming world brain on Yuuzhan, and they. But he had sworn not to use it for evil purposes, so he couldn't use it to attack the Vong or to kill them, and so, but he wanted to show them that their ideology was incorrect.
Yeah, you see that they respect pain and everything. They want to die in pain, but it's bothering them also. I thought nagging itch was about the worst thing that could ever happen to anybody over a long period of time. And so I had Jacen develop the itching plague. Jacen is probably the characters that will win this conflict, I suppose. He sees the Yuuzhan Vong in the Force. He's friend with the world brain on Yuuzhan. He's able to control the Jedi Meld. With all that power, he's already has a special destiny, but do you know what is the real destiny Verger was talking about? Can you give us a hint?
Well, I can give you the hint that Verger gave, which is that he's intimately involved with the fate of the Yuuzhan Vong.
Verger. Was that character talked about in any of the meetings? Like, there was some mystery to Verger.
Yeah, she is intended to be a mysterious character from a species that hasn't, been encountered before, and you get a lot more of her backstory later on in the series.
She was one of my favorite characters because she's just so extreme.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a Jedi, so she should be a good person, but on the other hand, she tortures the hero.
Yeah, that's true.
And she does it to make him a good person, which I think.
But it works.
So I was able to explain her. This is the first book out of the 14 in which Verger actually got to explain what she's been up to all along. She was a totally ambiguous figure who seemed to be working both sides for reasons of her own, but and that was true, actually.
Yeah.
She did have her own motivations for everything.
But her presence was probably just to explain this new concept of the Force.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, it was that, and just also to provide a really ambiguous character.
Yeah.
That was sort of very extreme and. And also she connects the whole NJO series to Rogue Planet.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The loophole back up to the past.
Mm-hmm.
The chapters where you tell the story of Verger, the other point of view of Rogue Planet. Do you know if Del Rey would be interested in telling that story in detail in a standalone novel about Verger? And would you be interested to do it?
No, I'm not sure there's a whole novel in that.
Oh, okay.
But
ebook maybe.
I'll suggest it to them.
Yeah, because
I know Zanama Sakat is going to become important later on in the series.
Yeah.
And the whole thing will be a full circle back to Rogue Planet.
Matthew Stover and yourself established and described the new concept of the Force, the one envisioned by Verger. How well was that concept received by Del Rey and Lucasfilm?
Well, actually, that aspect was approved by George Lucas himself.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the standard concepts of the Force were,
okay,
come from the guy who's in charge of the galaxy. What we've learned from the film so far isn't wrong, it's incomplete. That there is more to the Force than just light and dark. Now, Verger's theory, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily true, but this is what she believed, which is that light and dark are a reflection of the person who's interacting with the Force. That the Force will be dark for a dark person.
Yeah.
The Force light for a light person. And that at the end of Destiny's Way, when Jacen is able to use Force lightning, which is the Emperor's weapon, but without killing anyone.
Or the green lightning.
Green lightning, yeah. That's a major signal.
That there is different level in the Force.
Yes.
Or something.
Well, basically, the Force is much bigger.
Yeah.
Than anyone had thought.
Okay. Okay, now that Verger...
Much bigger than all the life in the universe.
Yeah.
It's bigger.
Walter John Williams, he was asked, did you have to get clearance for Verger's treatment of the Force and how she saw that? And Walter's response was, oh, that came from George. That was something that was discussed with George because George is sensitive about Force stuff. He wants to know, he wants to make sure that the Force doesn't get too mangled. And I wanted to ask if you had any input on that comment.
Yeah, I doubt that came from George.
Okay.
I think it might have come from Howard. See,
right.
Yeah, I think it probably Howard was George's mouthpiece for a lot of this stuff, and it probably stopped with him. I don't think it went on to George.
Okay, I know because I was wondering about that because I know Lucy said that she had a conversation with George on the phone about the series, but I don't know what they discussed.
I mean, early on that may have happened. Only in the beginning, when we set the series going, did we have to get his approval on certain things or run certain things by him. But I don't remember him weighing in as we went on. Well, he was doing his own thing.
And maybe what Walter might have meant as well is that Stover got to work with George again on Revenge of the Sith.
Right.
And he was saying this last year. He said, when George was there explaining to me how he saw the Force, Stover said it was so hard for him not to just be smiling and beaming the whole time because internally he's going, this is what I had Verger saying.
I think I remember him saying that after that we were both out there at the same time and he got to sit down with George for like 45 minutes to just talk about the novelization. Yeah, and he was beaming when he came out.
Yeah, because he goes, that's what I was going for. And, he said he didn't know, but it was just kind of instinct.
Right, right.
And end up in the same department, but
great minds. Great minds.
Now that Verger is dead, only Jacen will be able to teach that concept of the Force. Yeah. Is that concept of the Force simply put in NGO to mislead readers and hide something more dark side-ish or something else?
No. I don't think it's. I don't think we're going to see Jacen turn to the dark. He's been there. He's done that. He's seen it. He doesn't. What Verger's death does is it liberates Jacen to find his own path, because he's been caught in Destiny's Way between Verger's interpretation of the Force and of reality and Luke's. After all, Luke's apprentice. So now he's at liberty to find his own path and his own interpretation, and to synthesize all of the interpretations of the older generation.
That's right. Well, we remember in the beginning of the NGO books, he always was Mr. Meditation and so on. So now he'll actually have to meditate on what Verger told him, what Luke told him, and he'll have to choose what's the best thing, and maybe do like a little mix of both. And I really love that new concept of the Force. It's one concept I've been like appealing myself for a few years now.
Well, I was able, because I do read in philosophy, I was able to steal certain of these concepts
okay.
from actual people. Verger's philosophy is very much like that of Spinoza, the 17th century philosopher.
One of my hobbies is reading philosophy. So when Vergere gives essentially the second dispensation, a lot of that is I was able to borrow from great philosophers of the past. Vergere's philosophy is very Spinozan. She's very close to Benedict Spinoza, who is one of my main men philosophically speaking. Nominor is more of a Nietzschean, and he's concerned with matters with the will to power, as Nietzsche would have put it. And unfortunately, some of his ideas kind of got edited out at the last second. So we didn't get as full an exploration of his sort of mental journey as I would have liked. As I read all this material preparatory to working on the story, I realized that Star Wars and the expanded universe is the first introduction for a lot of readers to the world of ideas, big ideas. And so I wanted to make sure that the ideas that I inserted in there would not be toxic in some way. Or that if they were toxic, that they were labeled as toxic, so that people would understand they were toxic. Nominor's ideas, they're pretty toxic. But he's clearly not somebody to emulate. So those were some of my concerns as I set to work. There were certain things that had to happen in my particular volume. Okay, I had to kill Vergere because once Jacen has got sort of the second dispensation from her, she becomes redundant. Otherwise, the story is all about her. So she had to die for the same reason that Kenobi had to die in the first movie, because otherwise it becomes Kenobi's story, right?
She basically meets her fate by the end of Destiny's Way.
Yes.
And the one question that's been brought up, it hasn't been brought up a lot, surprisingly, was her ability to still communicate with Jacen as she's sacrificing herself and whatnot. Did you worry at all when writing those segments that you would run into problems with the whole, well, do Jedi disappear or not, and why contradiction that everybody seems to think that the answer is coming for in Episode 3?
Well, what I was most worried about, to be frank, is whether Lucasfilm would allow me to do that. Because Lucasfilm is very concerned about which Jedi can appear after their apparent death and which can't. And it hadn't actually been clear to me that Vergere was one of those. But fortunately, Lucasfilm read the scene, and once they read the scene, they liked it.
I wanted it to be a surprise in any number of ways. Vergere just was appearing in the middle of this battle, and eventually Jacen realized, wait, you're dead.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was a huge surprise to him, not to the reader who had seen what preceded, but I wanted to have that kind of shocking realization there.
Now, who does a scene like that get run by specifically, as far as who in the structure would have had to have read that, approved it, passed it along, read it, approved it, passed it along before it could be confirmed that you could do that?
I don't know for sure. I know it went through Shelley Shapiro, who is my editor at Del Rey, and Sue Rostoni, who is in charge of sort of spin-offs at Lucasfilm. And it may have gone right up to George Lucas. I don't know.
Okay. Cool.
He makes some of those, some of the heavier decisions himself, and others he trusts to his subordinates. So I don't actually know.
Okay. Another character.
I know there was one where George said no, and that was fortunately in the outline, and I never had to actually write that scene.
Oh, good.
How did you develop Shimra's character? Did you base him on something? He has a terrifying presence.
Yeah, Shimra is another character that's been very shadowy throughout the series. And
he seems to be able to read minds or something.
Yes, he has amazing psychic powers.
Okay.
And
is he a Jedi?
I wouldn't want to spoil any revelations coming up. He doesn't behave very much like a Jedi.
Okay.
Acquired his powers in a very unusual way for a very unusual purpose, and we don't know. Although I made certain revelations about Shimra, there are a lot more coming.
Oh no.
Effectively, what I reveal in Destiny's Way isn't only
it's just the tip of the iceberg.
Interesting aspects of his character.
Okay.
Because he had the presence of the Emperor when he spoke to all his lieutenants with Nominor and everybody else. He just they fear him totally. It's like the Emperor. So I was wondering if Maybe
You
a
do
parallel.
It's almost like, will you do the job, or will I break your nose a little bit more?
Okay.
Well, if you supervillains have a lot in common, particularly megalomaniac supervillains that want to control the galaxy.
Yes.
So there's that kind of superficial aspect. But actually, what Shimra's up to is pretty distinct from what the Emperor's up to. It's just we don't know that yet. We're going to see a lot more of Nominor, and
some kind
what you might call the domestic opposition to Shimra.
Okay.
Zavong La, the War Master for the Vong. I didn't think he was
Yeah.
ever going to die.
Well, he had to die for the same reason that Obi-Wan had to die. If Obi-Wan doesn't die, then it's not Luke's story, it's Obi-Wan's story.
Yeah.
So when Shimra turned up, the War Master had to go because it's not his story anymore. And I decided to pull a switcheroo because he died in combat with Jacen, but it had been set up to have another Skywalker be that character's potential enemy. But I just wanted to say anything can happen. Chewbacca can die. This is supposed to be a new way to do Star Wars was this series.
What do you tell people who say that Saving Law was killed too easily with a lightsaber and all?
He was fighting a Jedi. I mean, he's a great warrior and all, but he was fighting a Jedi. And not only that, he was fighting the sword of the Jedi.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
there were some kind
I had to, in order to give him a chance. I mean, he was fighting 3 Jedi, really.
Yes.
Now I had to nail all 3 of them to the floor so that he could attack one of them from behind. So, I should point out that I am a martial artist, and in reality, fights don't last very long.
Yeah, great master, do it
Movies
in a couple of seconds.
for 20 minutes, but in reality, it's 10 seconds or less.
Yeah.
2 minutes is a long fight.
And so I had to give one of the characters a significant handicap.
Yeah.
In order to keep it going as long as I did.
All the parties were very tired, so.
Yeah.
You wrote the scenes where we got to see the demise of the man who's been basically our antagonist through most of the storyline so far, Savong La.
Yes.
And there's a lot of, in that scene and in others dealing with hand-to-hand combat, there is a lot of detail to some of the moves being used. Did you draw on your martial arts experience to put, say, maybe some Kempo into those characters, or did you try to keep them fairly loose?
Well, I used my martial arts experience. I didn't use that much Kempo per se, because there were relatively few scenes of hand-to-hand combat.
Right.
But I've also have done fencing in the past, so I know the terminology and so on. And I have done Iaido and know at least some of the basics of Japanese sword systems, which is what Jedi largely use. So I was able to make use of that knowledge and that terminology.
Okay.
So the martial arts background, you're a black belt in Kempo Karate.
Yeah, I'm a 6th degree black belt in Kempo Karate. I've been doing it for over 40 years.
Have you taught classes as well?
I have, though not recently. But I used to teach an advanced class, and then I went for a couple weeks abroad on a trip. And I came back, and the Grand Master had taken over my class. And you can't say no to the Grand Master.
No.
And I wanted to learn from him, so I joined the class. I became a student. You will see a lot of quotations from my then teacher in the Star Wars book. Always defend the space that is not attacked. That's one of his mottos. And this is the late Grandmaster Bill Packer, who died in 2005.
A lot of the martial arts, the applied philosophy of the martial arts and so on, was either my own experience or in some cases taken from my teacher.
That makes a lot of sense. And so the martial arts also helped you do with some of the action scenes, because some of the, when you're fighting a Buzan Vong, you have the staffs and so on, and not all the writers can write that very well.
Mm-hmm.
And yours was one of the ones that you can actually follow the action a lot better, as opposed to they just say the action happens.
Yeah, well, thank you. I work hard on that. And it helps that I've experienced a fair amount of it too. So yes, that's one indication that's one place where my background was really useful.
When I was reading about you, Walter, is you seem like you're a mix of Star Wars author Alan Dean Foster and Steve Perry. Because Steve Perry does the martial arts and all that sort of stuff. Alan Dean Foster travels everywhere.
Yeah, he's somebody who travels more than I do, which is quite an accomplishment, actually. But yeah, whenever I see Alan Dean Foster, we get together and we exchange travel tips. He tells me where to go next.
When we were all poor writers together, me and George R.R. Martin and Melinda Snodgrass and Victor Milan and Daniel Abraham later, RPGs were inexpensive entertainment that we could all enjoy. And then everybody became successful. George more than anybody. This can be a solitary job, but it's only a lonely job if you let it be. Right? I mean, you are working at a keyboard wrestling with yourself for half the day. And that's solitary. But then, if you just stay alone, then it becomes a lonely thing. And so fortunately I have a lot of good friends here and elsewhere in the world that make it a pleasant place to be. So that's one reason that I do karate. That's a reason that I do scuba, and it gives me material to write about.
How went your collaboration with the other Star Wars authors?
On the whole, it was excellent, because they're all professionals. They all have been through it.
They were very Carl.
They were all happy to talk to other writers who knew what they were going through.
Okay, yeah. I guess it must be a pretty tough process.
Yeah, I sent an email to Elaine Cunningham and said, "Well, what's Jaina's mental state at the end of of Dark Journey? What's she going to be like when I have to write her?"
Science fiction always tends to bring in some sort of space battle of some kind, and the strategies involved in that. Have you had any maybe military background or strategy background or any particular period of history that you look at when it comes time to start thinking of strategic moves for these sorts of large space conflicts?
Well, the thing that comes closest is naval warfare. Not so much fighter combat, because I'm dealing with much larger ships than small fighter craft.
Right.
But it only applies to a small degree, because naval combat's fought on a flat two-dimensional surface. Mm-hmm. Well, except for submarines. But and space is three-dimensional, and movement in the sort of Newtonian universe is different from everything that we have here. In the ocean or in the atmosphere, you can manipulate the shape of your ship in order to produce a course change or some other result. You have ailerons, you have rudders that interact with the atmosphere or the water. And in space, you don't have that. Mm-hmm. In order to maneuver, you don't push a rudder pedal. You have to reorient your entire ship and fire the engine in a different direction. So, one of the things, if you're in air combat, you want to get on the tail of your opponent. Mm-hmm. Because you're behind them, they can't see you very well, and they can't shoot back. In space, none of these things apply. If you're behind your opponent, basically he can just sort of drop missiles right on you. Mm. He can reorient his ship so that it's pointing straight at you, and then you're running smack into a missile or a beam barrage. So I'm kind of making this stuff up. A lot of it. I'm not. I don't see it in a whole lot of other books. They're
right.
Perhaps they're wiser than I am. I'm actually describing what's going on in these combats, and most of the books that I've seen that have scientifically valid space combats kind of gloss over it really quickly.
Yeah, seems like it.
Yeah.
Is there anything in Destiny's Way, including Ylesia, that you really liked but was edited out in the final version? You said at the beginning that there was this conversation between the Yuuzhan Vong Commander and Han Solo, but is there anything?
I think I've had bad luck with Han Solo scenes.
Okay.
Because the one that I really wanted to keep took place at the Imperial headquarters of Bastion, where I have Han and the Imperial leader Peleon just get drunk.
Oh.
And they get totally blasted and have one of those old soldiers conversations, and
that would have been cool.
Reeling off home, and Han Leia have a really deep emotional connected conversation. We find out how he's been feeling about everything, about Chewbacca, about Anakin's death, his sort of ambiguous feelings about Jacen, and so on.
He finally opens up.
And it's only stuff that he'd talk about if he were smashed. He's very stoic. He'd never talk about this.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't the
was,
kind of image that Del Rey would have wanted to show the Imperial commander.
And well, now Lucasfilm decided that having Han get drunk was a bad example.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I didn't present it as a good thing. I gave him a really good hangover.
well, John,
in which he was complaining that space was too noisy.
Are there any scenes or things that you had in the book or you wanted to put in the book that they said specifically no, or this just wouldn't fit either for time or you couldn't get it right that you can share with us?
Okay, here's one that when the second trilogy appeared, everyone was a little surprised that Jedi weren't allowed to marry in the past. This was a brand new restriction that appeared, which made good drama in the films, but it tended to call a lot of the expanded universe into question, where all of these Jedi are having relationships and getting married, and Luke Skywalker. Wait, I thought they weren't allowed. And so what I wanted to have was, Mara was pregnant with Ben, and I wanted to have an explanation of why Jedi weren't allowed to marry, because that wasn't provided in the film, and nobody quite understood why. And my thought was that an infant being carried in the womb and being exposed to a lot of active force powers going on all around its environment might become prematurely connected to the Force and become really a real wild card. Might become essentially possessed by the Force in some way. And so I was going to have Ben turn into a scary little kid. And they said no. And I perfectly, and I didn't think they were going to say yes, but I put it in anyway, into my proposal, and they said no, and I was perfectly prepared for them to say no.
So basically, using the Force is like using drugs when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
Interesting. That would have been a very interesting idea to put in there, though I can see why they'd say no to it, because it can potentially hurt some of their upcoming characters, but at the same time, would be very interesting to delve into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think probably I complicated the expanded universe enough in that one book without introducing that element. So
it would have been interesting.
It was understandable if they didn't want that. They had other plans for Ben, I'm sure.
Yeah. Destiny's Way. Did you have any control over the title of the novel, or did they already have all the titles planned out?
No. Well, it was my original title. I think was Destiny's Road.
Okay.
And they said there are no roads in space, so come up with another one. And I thought Destiny's Hyperspace Bypass just didn't sound right. So, so I used Way because there's a multiple meaning there. I mean, Way could be a road or a lane or something, but it could also be the Way, the Tao, the Force.
What do you thought about the Destiny's Way cover?
I thought it was fine.
Okay.
I should point out, for anyone who doesn't know this, that authors have no say in what goes on the cover.
Yeah.
So all I want in a cover now, having had 23 books out and having seen a lot of covers, having had some really, really, really bad ones, is I just want it not to be too ugly.
Okay.
And the cover had, Star Wars on it and my name.
And that's good. That was already beautiful.
So already they're batting 80%, right? If it just isn't too ugly, that's all I care about anymore.
Okay. Raven also wanted to know if you were part of the team that edited the content to your book to adapt it to the audio format.
No.
The audiobook, no?
No, they have whole teams of specialists to do that stuff.
Because the Destiny's Way version of the audiobook is, from what I've heard, really not that good. So the book.
I'm sorry to hear it. I haven't heard it actually. I'm waiting for somebody to send me a copy.
Because they apparently removed the ties to the Rogue Planet novels from the audiobook. So that would kind of make it kind of sad in a way, since it's the entire plotline coming back all the way.
I don't know why they edit them for the audio book. I mean,
because they're too long.
There's just so long tape on tape, and there's only.
Fans would listen to every word.
Yes.
Yeah. But I don't think they quite realize who the audience for these is. The audience is going to be the people who have already read the book and now just want to listen to it word by word. Yeah. Anyway.
For someone who didn't know very much about Star Wars besides the film, you did a pretty good job, I think.
Thank you. It was a very intense period, and I had some good collaborators too.
Yeah.
Most of the other Star Wars writers.
Yeah.
And this through email and phone calls, and occasionally we'd have a meeting.
Yeah. Speaking of that, what were your experiences working with the others NGO authors and editors?
It was all pretty positive. Although it's kind of a cumbersome process because you can't just start writing. You have to produce an outline that's acceptable to everybody, and then once that's accepted, then you can actually start writing. But then you get notes from the editor in New York, and then you get notes from Lucasfilm. And the notes from Lucasfilm are very thorough.
I'm pretty sure.
They're very thorough. and they get down to the matters of eye color and what rare nitrogenous compounds people are breathing on their home planet. But there was quite a lot of that to deal with.
Did you have to search back to the characters outside of the NGO series? A little bit, maybe?
I didn't really have the time. But fortunately, they have that all pretty well summarized.
Okay.
In a lot of the source books.
Okay.
They have the source books for
the chronology and everything.
The droids, the source books for the spaceships, and so on. So.
That's cool.
And then occasionally I got corrected on that. I would say the source book, and say, but no, not really. It's
not all the information are in those guides, so.
Not everything's in there. There's a lot that isn't, and so I was always sending frantic email queries about what had slipped through the cracks.
And how much of a fan are you now, having written a novel about Star Wars?
I am becoming a huge fan of the other Star Wars writers.
Okay.
Because I know how much work they do.
Yes.
And I know how difficult it is, and I think they've done an extraordinary job with it.
It's pretty restricted.
Time limitations we all get, and I'm a fairly slow writer.
Okay.
I've written 23 books, but I do it by persistence. I just by spending a lot of hours at it, not because I can write a book in a weekend. So
okay.
So it was a real challenge for me. But I'm happy to report that I made my deadline, and nobody else on the series did. That's
I heard
I'm
that.
Feeling very accomplished.
Yeah, I heard that.
It boosted my confidence because I had to write it in 5 months.
Okay.
And I had never written a book in 5 months.
That's pretty good.
You can do it.
And I just did it by eating, sleeping, breathing Star Wars for that whole period. I was my friends didn't see me. I was very uncivil. I'd show up at dinner and just shovel the food into my mouth with my hands. Agger back to my office and work some more.
Yeah, we're quite used to that.
Yeah.
The deadlines on that series were fierce, and the publication deadlines were really fierce. I not only had to have the book in by a certain date, but all the edits and the copy edits, etc., had to be done by a certain date. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to get into print on time, and that would have been a real mess. I didn't get to read the books that immediately preceded mine. So there were some difficulties in that. There's a certain amount of redundancy between the books that immediately precede mine, because they had some of the same ideas. And by that point, it was too late in the process. There really wasn't anything I could do to change it. If your listeners are wondering why some of the Star Wars books are imperfect, that's why. You could have one really perfect Star Wars book a year. Or you could have, 8 or 10 or 12 imperfect books a year. Which would you prefer? The market says we want more Star Wars books.
Now that you read some critic about Destiny's Way, is there anything that you would have liked to change if you've known?
Well, the things like the mistake I made with Corran Horn, and there was another character that I got the species wrong.
Oh.
And if you haven't noticed, I'm trying to tell you, we deal with a lot of handicaps.
Yeah.
In writing these books, and there's a lot of time constraints. But all I can say about the criticism is I wish they wouldn't get on my case for something that George Lucas said to do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I've got a message from the chat.
We believe that the person, the actual character that you misbeast, if we can say that, was Tracina Lobi.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, okay, I'm busted.
Gotcha.
Yeah, she was described as a Chev, and I looked up what a Chev was.
Okay.
And it wasn't in any of the databases.
Yeah.
But they had a Chevin in there, and I just got confused between the two. I didn't realize that they weren't the same.
Yeah, it's starting to be like a little too many planets and a little too many species in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, you have to get special permission from on high to even make up a new planet now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ebac, the moon that I had, where the climactic battle took place.
Yes.
I had to get special permission to create that.
Okay.
They much prefer that you use planets that are already
known.
Already known, already in the known universe.
Okay. As an author, what is your take on the expanded universe versus the official stories of the movie? A lot of people denies the expanded universe because it's not created by George Lucas and everything. What is your take on that?
Okay, this may sound a little self-centered, but I think the expanded universe has become the Star Wars universe now. It is true that what George Lucas said goes. I mean, he created it, he owns it, it's his, and it's his sandbox to play in. But on the other hand, there's just such an enormous amount of work and sweat and devotion that's gone into the expanded universe. And I think that's really where the center of it is right now.
I think that the more hardcore fans who want more than just the movie go to the expanded universe to have more detail, more explanation. They want
us.
I have a whole theory about this. If you have some time,
go for it.
Go ahead.
Because I've written film and TV also.
Okay.
And one of the differences between writing fiction and writing film and TV is that people in film and TV have no inner life.
Okay.
You can't show what they're thinking. You can't show it.
That's true.
You can't have them just feel something. Now, you have to actually have them act. They actually move and do something on the screen in order to show whatever's going on inside. And when I started writing film, this was very difficult for me to absorb because all of my characters very much have a strong inner life in fiction. And I think what makes the media tie-in books so fascinating to the fans is that it provides that inner life that you don't see on the screen.
And what are the pros and cons on working on someone else's universe?
Well, going in that you're not going to have the final word.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that so if you go in knowing that things can change and that other writers and people like Lucasfilm have to be accommodated, then it's no problem. Sometimes I disagreed with some of the decisions that were made, but on the other hand, I don't own the Star Wars universe, so I had no grounds for complaint.
What was your favorite NGO book apart from yours?
Oh gosh, let me think. I liked Balance Point a lot.
Yeah,
you liked it?
I think Kathy Tyers is a terrific writer.
Now that you've entered Star Wars, or I guess as you were getting into it, was there any worry that to some people, or in some circles of your readership, it would be Star Wars that you would be remembered for as opposed to all your other works, which is such a huge library by itself?
Well, I've sort of gotten to the point where just being remembered is the goal. Here's the thing is that, I've written, it's 23 novels now. I'm just finishing my 24th. Or 24 volumes, I should say. Now, they're not all novels.
Right.
If anybody's reading any of them 100 years from now, I'll be really happy.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be dead but happy. So, that's you can't predict what you're going to be remembered for.
Right.
And the fact that I'm remembered at all, would just be enough for me.
I really enjoyed writing Destiny's Way, and I wasn't sure whether I would, because I'd never done work made for hire before.
You really nailed it.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the book came out, the reaction was mixed. There were people who really hated it. There were people who thought it was the best ever. There weren't a whole lot of people in the middle.
Really?
Because it wasn't how they had pictured these characters, maybe. I had my own take on the characters. People got really angry that I depicted Mara Jade as being happy. And I thought, why wouldn't she be at this stage in her life? She's had a dangerous pregnancy, but it resolved well, right? I mean, she had the curse on her, but it's not there anymore. She was separated from the husband that she loved, but now she's not. So I thought, I want to see what Mara Jade is like when she's at play, because she hasn't had the opportunity to play for an awful long time. But there were people who hated that. They wanted her to be, to be dragging herself around with a thundercloud over her head raining on her, right? And that was not where she was in this book.
No, all the characters I thought were great. I never really thought of that, getting mixed reactions, because I never read them obviously as they came out.
Yeah.
Here it's.
I haven't heard any negative reactions to that book for a long time. They've all been really positive. So I think people who've come to it now, are liking it a lot. So
yeah,
I'm very happy.
I have a little book club that I do with some of my local friends. So we're all reading the new Jedi Order series for the first time. When we got to your book, it was all of us. We couldn't put it, and we finished it in under a week.
There was one guy who read it in the bookstore, because this came out in hardback originally, and he couldn't afford a hardback.
Really?
Speed read the entire book in the bookstore off a copy off the shelf. I don't think his comprehension was enhanced by this, just from the questions he was asking me, but I have to admire his dedication.
You know how the NGO series will end, right? Or approximately?
Approximately, yeah.
So since you can tell us the storyline, obviously, or even hint us, how much the fan will be surprised? If you can...
I think there will be some big surprises.
Surprise or shock?
I hope not shock.
Okay.
Because I think we're setting it up properly. I don't think we're cheating.
Okay. There's not too misleading.
We're misleading, but we're misleading fairly.
Okay.
that when you come to the end and you go back and look at the whole series, you will see definitely that it was headed there all along. It all ties up amazingly. If you look at Vergere's backstory,
right, with Rogue Planet and everything.
Mm-hmm. Right. That all of these elements are going to be brought together. I'm actually looking forward to reading these books. Cool. I want to see how they do it.
Cool. Now, on that, as far as things being tied up, we've asked questions of Rostoni and Shapiro and a few other people who are answering questions on the official site right now, who have basically said that they don't have a feel or a desire right now, at least, to do any post New Jedi Order stories. By what you know of the story, would you consider where things are going to be a fitting end on the off chance that there isn't anything after it?
I would hope it would continue.
Okay.
Because I think that after the end of NJO, there's going to be a really interesting galaxy, and with a lot of possibilities in it. Well, see, we have to wait till after the third movie's released. I think Del Rey's license to do Star Wars books.
Yeah, it expires
around then.
2005.
So they can't do any big, large, long-term projects.
Right.
Until they get the license renewed, and then I think we'll see stuff. So.
Okay. Cool.
You obviously knew the whole outcome. They sent you everything that they were looking for for your book, but you obviously know what happens at the end. You already know that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did you have any ideas of where the stories could have went after that? Like after the
New Jedi Order, or just after my book?
No, after New Jedi Order. Like, did you?
It was under discussion, but they hadn't made any decisions. I did talk to the editor about an idea I had for another Star Wars series. I won't go into what it was, but that time was not right. I remember there was one writer who particularly wanted the next series to be the Revolt of the Droids, because basically we have these sentient machines that are slaves.
Yeah. And
maybe, and once they get the idea that they shouldn't be slaves anymore, there's a lot of potential problems because they have a lot of power, these guys. So that would have made an interesting series, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, that does sound very interesting.
Yeah.
When you were in these meetings with everyone,
right?
Like, was George ever involved or on the phone, or
No,
was there any?
no, he has people for that. I like to say I had lunch with George, right? Which meant that he and I were in the same room eating lunch, just not together. And George Lucas is very protective of his privacy. I was told, if you meet him in the corridor, you may not interact with him.
Really?
Don't even nod hello. Don't even, yeah. But he just doesn't want people making a fuss over him. If he approaches you, you can talk to him. But Skywalker Ranch is just an awesome place. It is amazing. Yeah, I mean, the special effects happen in these brick buildings that look as if they were like a New England mill from the mid 19th century. But it's got all of this up-to-date modern CGI stuff in there. The main house that George Lucas lived in with his kids, he just didn't live there when I was there, but now it's just kind of a place for meetings. It's brilliantly designed. It looks like a little Queen Anne style Victorian home, right? And then once you get in it, you realize it's huge. It's just so well proportioned. You don't realize it's huge until you can actually get lost in it, right?
Yeah.
But it just looks like a modest little house from the outside. It's bigger on the inside. It's a TARDIS. I don't know.
So would you, if they approached you, would you like to return to Star Wars with a totally new storyline now? Or are you satisfied that you did your one novel and now you can go do everything else?
I would not mind being asked again, assuming, again, because I'm a very busy guy, that we can work some time in. But, yeah, I'd love to do it again.
Any messages you would want to give to Star Wars fandom, or anyone that you would like to thank along the way, since you got the forum here before we go?
Oh, sure. Well, I'd like to thank Charlie Shapiro and everybody at Lucasfilm for what was, on the whole, a pretty positive experience. I enjoyed writing this book a lot more than I thought I would, in fact, and had a great time with it.
What about the short story? How did that all come about?
They wanted a story that they could sell exclusively in electronic. They wanted to find out what would happen. Because they didn't have readers yet, Maybe there was a Sony reader out there somewhere. But anyway, so that was the idea. And I realized that the story that I was thinking of would fit into Destiny's Way as a sort of missing episode. And so it is basically a chapter in Destiny's Way, except it's not bound in there. It's available separately.
Yeah.
You also wrote the ebook Ylesia, if I'm pronouncing this right.
I have no idea how that's pronounced.
Okay.
I always pronounce it Ylesia myself, but it's.
I always went for Ylesia because it sounded like Elysian Fields. And,
right, yeah.
Now that story continues the whole Thrackan, Sal Solo, and Peace Brigade plot thread.
Right.
Now, knowing going into it that an ebook is going to usually have a narrower readership than a paper printed novel tends to, do you approach writing ebooks any differently than you do regular publications are going to come out in hardback or paperback?
Well, this is the only story that I've ever written that was actually intended specifically for an ebook. Although some of my other stories have appeared as ebooks, that was not necessarily the audience that I was heading for right away. But in answer to your question, no, I didn't write it any differently.
Okay.
It was a subplot that had been in my original outline for Destiny's Way, and which I discarded because it was just getting in the way of the finish of the novel. Not that it would have taken too much time to read, but it just would have been a kind of lump sitting there in which, once you're dealing with a narrative and once the end is in sight, you just want a clean rush towards the end. And this just sort of would have been a bump in the road. But for anyone who's obsessive enough about this, it does take place between chapter 20 and 21 of Destiny's Way.
There you go.
Probably you heard from other fans about the comment of Jacen opening up his cockpit in space and almost stepping out in Ylesia. I know the physics doesn't always apply in Star Wars, but maybe that was a little bit extreme.
there was no reason not to lean out at that point.
Yeah.
The danger wasn't from his opening the cockpit and leaning out, because he was.
There was some kind of force bubble that was keeping with the environment of the cockpit, but
I mean, the hazard was the fact that there was this creature that was eating his ship.
Yeah.
So he had to deal with that first of all, because if you're in orbit without a ship, you're sort of out of luck.
You're a dead dog in space.
I really like writing short fiction. It's not necessarily the best financial choice. I think I lose money with practically every short story that I write, but I just really love doing them.
I believe they had added it to one of the future books here in the line. I believe.
Yeah. Yes, it was available in print in some odd place.